Chapter 1320. Sikong Tan had built up such a family business from scratch, so he had some ability. Otherwise, Chu Xiu would not have chosen him. He was a minor character in the southern region, but it was precisely because of this minor character that he had such a thorough understanding of the entire southern region. It was also because of this minor character that he tried his best to curry favor with these powerful primogenitors. He knew Sword Venerable Ling Tian and even Su Tianya and the others far better than Chu Xiu did. At this time, Su Tianya and Fang Baidu were preparing to return to the southern barbarian jungle where they cultivated in seclusion, but the expressions on their faces were not good. Fang Baidu sighed. If we had known that Su Jiang and Chen Jiulong would have such a calamity in their lives, we would not have agreed to let them go to the exalted divine palace. Now that both of them have died in the exalted divine palace, where are we going to find two more suitable successors? Su Tianya also rubbed his head. If you don't know, then I don't know either. It's all those damned big sects' fault. 90% of the Daoist martial artists have been recruited by them, leaving us very few. Fang Baidu rubbed his chin and said, why don't we go to those small sects or independent cultivators and take a look? There might be some fish that slipped through the net. Su Tianya shook his head. The probability is not high. Whether it's those martial artists from small sects or independent cultivators, if they can show good talent, they will either be cultivated as the head of a family or have long entered a big sect. How can we have a chance to pick up the leftovers? The two looked at each other and sighed at the same time. The requirements for primogenitors to accept disciples were so strict purely because they did not have the ability to select a large number of disciples like those big sects and then select the best successor from among the large number of disciples. They only had one chance, and they could only put all their energy and resources on one person. Now that they were given another chance, although they were not old and had a certain amount of energy, the problem was, where was the person? At this moment, Fang Baidu suddenly glanced in one direction. Su Tianya was puzzled. What's wrong? There are people fighting over there. It seems to be a battle of extermination. Su Tianya thought for a while and said, that seems to be the Phoenix Mountain. An abandoned disciple of the warfighting divine sect gathered a bunch of villains and bandits to build a mountain stronghold. I think they are called the Chilan bandits or something. Anyway, they are just a bunch of mobs. The battle martial god sect is the same. The Chilan pirates have been raiding and robbing around here, and they even dared to rob some small sections. They've killed countless people, and their reputation is extremely bad, but they don't care about them. Aren't they afraid of losing face? Fang Baidu said in a low voice, ever since the warfighting sect became a large sect in the southern region, they have become more and more unscrupulous in their conduct. In the past, they still valued their reputation a little, but now they don't care about it at all. Let's go and see who's doing this. Fang Baidu and Su Tianya flew into the air with the mentality of watching a good show. When they arrived at the top of the Phoenix Mountain to take a look, the scene was somewhat beyond their expectations. This was indeed a battle of extermination, but the ones who did it were two women. One of the women looked delicate and charming, but her attacks were nimble and ruthless. All kinds of secret arts and demonic skills emerged one after another, making it impossible to defend against them. The other woman, on the other hand, was the opposite. Although her strength was a little weaker, and she was only at the spiritual refinement realm with real fire, she was valiant and heroic, and her combat strength was amazing. She held a blood-red spear in her hand, and as she flew up and down, she pierced and sent all the martial artists in front of her flying. A woman wielding a spear actually displayed an indomitable momentum like that of thousands of troops and horses. She had mastered the essence of spear techniques. Fang Baidu suddenly said, of these two people, one of them should be practicing the cultivation method of the devil path, but her attacks are nimble and elegant, which is the essence of our Guyu lineage. As for the other woman, her spear technique is already rare and outstanding among warriors of the same rank. Most importantly, I can see that she should be cultivating in a Daoist lineage of body-refining mysterious technique. The body-refining cultivation method of your divine dragon-subduing general lineage should also be inclined to the Taoist lineage, right? Hearing Fang Baidu's words, Su Tianya finally realized that these two people could be said to be suitable to be their disciples. Moreover, of these two people, one was at the mystic illuminating realm, and the other was at the spiritual refinement realm with real fire. They already had a good martial arts foundation. As long as they were trained well, they would be able to catch up to the dead Su Jiang and Chen Jiulong in a short time. However, Fang Baidu said again, but we still need to investigate the identities of these two women. We have just lost our disciples, and now they have appeared. This is too much of a coincidence. Su Tianya's eyes lit up. Coincidence? You are just thinking too much. A suitable disciple just happened to appear, and you actually think it's a coincidence. This is an opportunity, okay? Fang Baidu still wanted to say something, but he suddenly saw Sikong Tan, who was standing on the other side of Qilin Mountain. Hey, isn't this the fat Sikong Tan of the Divine Machine sect? Why is he here? Sikong Tan was slick in his dealings. Fang Baidu and Su Tianya were both primeval sovereigns of the southern region, so he had naturally communicated with them before. Of course, it was more appropriate to say that he was currying favor with them. That fat man is the most well-informed in the southern region. Let's go and ask him. At this moment, Sikong Tan was also waiting there, pretending to be calm. He deliberately stood there to let Fang Baidu and Su Yu see him. Chu Xiu had instructed him to complete this task. Sikong Tan thought for a long time and decided that the safest way was to loosen the reins only to grasp them better. He wanted them to take the initiative to accept them as disciples, instead of sending them in himself. Therefore, in addition to Luo Feiheng and Long Longer, someone else had to come forward and explain everything. This person was the most suitable. Seeing that Fang Baidu and Su Tianya were indeed attracted by him, Sikong Tan immediately put on a look of pleasant surprise and went forward to ask, "Greetings, Venerable Gu Yu and Divine General Dragon Subduing. What brings the two of you here?" Su Tianya did not waste time with him. He pointed at Mount one finger and asked, "Do you recognize the two women on the mountain? Who are they?" Sikong Tan sighed and said, "Of course I recognize them. I was the one who sold them the information about how they destroyed the Qilin bandits. In fact, they are also a pair of pitiful people. Their fathers were the 27th head of the Grazing Horse Villa, Luo Fei, and the 32nd head of the Grazing Horse Villa, Long Wanli. After the Grazing Horse Villa was destroyed by the Qilin bandits, they wandered the martial world. However, because they accidentally obtained the relics of two primeval venerables, their strength and cultivation improved greatly. This time, they came back to buy the information from me to take revenge. However, these two girls have no savings except for the inheritance they accidentally obtained. Even the money they used to buy the information was on credit. However, I am a kind-hearted person. Seeing that they have been through so many hardships, I decided to provide them with the information first and pay them later." Sikong Tan forcibly suppressed the nervousness in his heart and nagged for a long time. Su Tianya and Fang Baidu did not doubt him. They looked at each other and nodded lightly at the same time. There were so many primeval venerables who had passed down their legacies since ancient times. Many of them had lost their legacies and had no inheritors. It was normal for these two girls to obtain the relics left behind by such primeval venerables. Moreover, Sikong Tan's words were reasonable. They had never thought that this slick person in the southern region, who was also famous for being timid, would dare to lie to them. After a long while, Long Ling, and Luo Feiheng walked down with a murderous aura and threw a pile of secret boxes to Sikong Tan. "Fatty, this is your reward. It's more than what you promised." Sikong Tan beamed and said, "Thank you, ladies. In the future, if you need to buy any information, or even elixirs, weapons, formation materials, and so on, you can come to the Divine Machine Gate to look for me." At this time, Su Tianya suddenly said, you two girls are quite talented. Unfortunately, you never had a good teacher to guide you. If you continue to cultivate recklessly, you may reach your peak now. It's not easy to break through the barrier between heaven and man. The two of us cherish talents and want to take you two as our disciples. As long as you are willing to acknowledge us as your masters, the resources and cultivation methods of our two branches will all be yours. I can even guarantee that with your talents, I can help you break through the barrier within 20 years. Luo Feiheng curled her lips and said, "Who are you? You want to accept disciples just because you say so. Do we look like people who lack a master?" Long Linger, on the other hand, pulled Luo Feiheng and said cautiously, "Seniors, please forgive us. We sisters have been traveling in Jianghu and depend on each other for survival. Until now, we have no intention of acknowledging a master." Sikong Tan hurriedly slapped his thigh and said, "Oh. Do you know who these two seniors are? They are primeval venerables. This is the famous dragon-suppressing divine general, Su Tianya, and the other is Venerable Guyu Fong Baidu. There are many people in the martial world who want to be their disciples, but these two seniors don't even think of them. It's your good fortune to be chosen by these two seniors." Su Tianya didn't say anything, but he still smiled proudly. In the martial world, the identity of Venerable Gu naturally had a high status. Although it couldn't be compared to the leader of a real big sect, at least it wouldn't be degraded, especially for some rogue martial artists. However, Long Ling still put on a cautious look and said, "We appreciate the kindness of the two seniors, but we really don't need to acknowledge you as our master." If Long Ling and Luo Feiheng were ecstatic and wanted to acknowledge them as their masters, they might not be used to it. However, the more the two of them refused, the more they wanted to take each other as their disciples. Fong Baidu coughed and said, "Ladies, I know how you feel. Youths are full of ups and downs. After wandering in the martial world for a long time, it's inevitable that you will be wary of everyone. But we are different. You know who we are. To put it bluntly, we are both martial immortals. If we have any ill intentions towards you, do you have the ability to resist? On the contrary, as long as you acknowledge us as your masters, you won't have to worry about anyone harboring ill intentions towards you. At the very least, you won't have to go through what you experienced when you were youths again." Hearing this, Long Ling and Luo Feiheng were a little moved. With Sikong Tan adding fuel to the fire, the two finally looked at each other and bowed to Fong Baidu and Su Tianya. "Greetings, Master." Fong Baidu and Su Tianya looked at each other, and a hint of a smile appeared in their eyes. But they didn't notice that when Long Ling and Luo Feiheng looked at each other, there was also an unfathomable smile in their eyes. Chapter 1321. Southern Region, Under the Heaven Sword Sect, Heavenly Sword Peak. Fang Chi Shao faced the sun as he climbed step by step towards the peak of Heavenly Sword Peak. As he climbed, he mumbled something. "Prioritizing a lover over a friend is inhumane. I hope you won't be able to find a wife for the rest of your life." The person Fang Chi Shao was cursing was Chu Xiu. At this moment, Fang Chi Shao's face was filled with resentment and he was in a bad mood. He felt that he had been tricked. He knew about Luo Feiheng and Long Longer. Chu Xiu found Sikong Tan. His identity, experience, everything was arranged properly. Sikong Tan even took the initiative to cooperate with them to infiltrate the enemy's base. "What about him, Fang Chi Shao?" Chu Xiu patted his shoulder and threw him a sentence, "Act according to the situation." Under the Heaven Sword Sect was strict in accepting disciples. Even if Chu Xiu found Sikong Tan, it would be useless. With Sikong Tan's level, he wouldn't be able to reach under the Heaven Sword Sect. Therefore, the arrangement that Chu Xiu gave to Fang Chi Shao was to let him challenge Heavenly Sword Peak and become one of the 13 Sword Peak Masters of Under the Heavens Sword Sect. Under the Heavens Sword Sect was known as Under the Heavens, which meant that it encompassed the Sword Dao of the world. Therefore, Among the 13 sword peaks of Under the Heavens sword sect, there was a common people's sword peak which was prepared for the Under the Heavens sword experts. The common people's sword peak opened once every 10 years. All the martial artists in the pugilistic world, no matter if you were a wandering martial artist or a martial artist from a small sect or a small family, as long as you could pass the test, you could enter the common people's sword peak and become a disciple of Under the Heavens sword sect. Coincidentally, during this period of time, the common people's sword peak opened. Therefore, Chu Xiu let Fang Qi Shao challenge the common people's sword peak openly. In the words of Chu Xiu, you, Fang Qi Shao, were the chief swordsman in the lower realm, and you will still be the chief swordsman in the Daoist world. How could those loose cultivators compare to you, Fang Qi Shao? The common people's sword peak master has to be you. No schemes can compare to true strength. At that time, Fang Qi Shao was beaming with joy when he was fooled by Chu Xiu. He casually asked Sikong Tan for a fake identity of a rogue cultivator and came to the sword sect of the world. However, when he arrived here, he felt that he seemed to have been fooled by Chu Xiu. To enter common people's sword peak, the first hurdle was to climb to the top of the heaven-reaching sword peak. This place restricted all internal strength and true qi. One could only rely on their physical strength and willpower to climb up step by step. Although this was not a difficult task for the seventh young master Fang, it was very tiring. There were some martial artists who were climbing up too. However, those with weak foundations and willpower were eliminated one after another. After finally reaching the peak with great difficulty, seventh young master Fang finally saw the upper echelons of the world's sword sections. Sword Venerable Luo Shan, Sword Venerable Azure Dawn, Mu Baishuang, and the newly promoted Sword Venerable Nine Nether, Yi Guixia. Even Sword Venerable Ling Tian, Sheng Jiuyuan, was watching from the high platform. Sheng Jiuyuan had a close relationship with the sword sect of the world. In such a grand occasion, Sheng Jiuyuan came to observe the ceremony and also to help the sword sect of the world. Luo Shan looked at the martial artists present and said solemnly, although the sword sect of the world is said to have the sword path of the world, we don't dare to say that we are perfect. The sword Dao lineage was endless. The sword of the predecessors might not be strong. The sword of the later generations might not be weak. Today, we will open the common people's sword peak and choose a peak master. Everyone, let this old man see what sort of shocking sword Dao has been born in this world. Let the sword arena begin. Along with Luo Shan's words, on the square at the peak of the heavenly sword peak, long swords with runes carved on them rose from the ground, giving off sword energy that shot into the clouds. This was the sword arena of the world's sword sect. It was made up of tens of thousands of long swords, and each of the previous swords was a famous swordsman of the 13 sword peaks of the world's sword sect. All the sword cultivators present jumped onto those long swords and started to fight. The so-called common people's sword peak selection wasn't to choose the first but to choose the swordsman who met the requirements of the sword sect of the world. Your strength could not be at the peak, but you had to bring out enough sword path and sword path talent for the sword sect of the world's sword sect to pay attention to you. Fang Qi Shao carried the shocking centipede sword in his hand and slowly stepped onto the sword arena. The other swordsmen on the sword arena were extremely nervous. Only Fang Qi Shao was leisurely, like he was here to watch a show. He didn't know that his appearance attracted a lot of hatred. In an instant, a few swordsmen stared at him and attacked him. Fang Qi Shao sighed, "It is just an arena, why are you risking your life? I don't want you to fight to the death. Do you think that the sword path is just a crude way of killing? TSK, shallow." When the few swordsmen heard Fang Qi Shao's nagging, they all looked like they had eaten a fly and they hollered, "Shut up." As they said that, the sword energy in their hands became stronger. It was obvious that they wanted to kick this annoying fellow out. But in the next moment, a blinding sword light had already appeared in front of everyone. The sword light wasn't very beautiful, but it swam between the many sword energies like it had passed through time and space. The swords in the hands of the other few swordsmen were involuntarily attracted to the sword light. It was as if they were actively trying to hit the sword light. Moreover, when one person's sword aura hit the sword light, an intense sword energy fluctuation exploded out. But coincidentally, it triggered the sword aura of the martial artist around him, and instantly it started to explode. It was as if this circle of people had planned this beforehand. A series of sword auras exploded and their strength multiplied. They actually sent the circle of people who attacked Fang Qixiao flying. This scene instantly attracted the attention of the others. But before they could react, Sword Saint Luo Shan, who was sitting on the main seat, suddenly said, "Stop. There is no need to fight, you are the peak head of common people's sword peak." Everyone looked towards where his hand was pointing. Luo Shan was pointing at Fang Qixiao. At that moment, all the swordsmen who were participating in the common people's sword peak selection were stunned. What was going on? This fellow just used one sword and he became the peak head of common people's sword peak? Was it a joke? Everyone felt a little unhappy, but Luo Shan didn't care about them. He just heaved a sigh. It is the cause and effect sword technique. The world's sword sects included 99% of the sword techniques in the world. Naturally, Luo Shan recognized the cause and effect sword technique. But after so many years, to be able to comprehend the cause and effect sword technique to such a level at such an age was extremely rare. There shouldn't be anyone like that. Moreover, in Fang Qixiao's sword technique, there was something that belonged to him. Xing Jiuyuan, who was at the side, suddenly said, "Sect leader, how about giving this person to me? My sword Saint Ling Tian's lineage owes the world's sword sects a promise." Luo Shan squinted his eyes and said, "You can't teach this person. His sword technique has already taken shape. As long as he steps into martial celestial, it won't be weaker than your lineage's sword technique. If you take him in, you will be destroying him and you." Before Xing Jiuyuan could say anything, Luo Shan waved at Fang Qixiao and called him over. He asked, "May I know your name and background?" Fang Qixiao shrugged his shoulders and said, "Southern Region Sword Technique Loose Cultivator Fang Qixiao. My family is dead and my master is also dead. I am so poor that I can't even afford to go to a brothel. I can only come to the World Sword Sect to try my luck. Speaking of which, the World Sword Sect is such a big sect. You don't have to spend money to go to a brothel, right?" Previously, Chu Xiu didn't ask Fang Qixiao to act. He only told him to perform according to his character. Although they were enemies, Chu Xiu had to admit the World Sword Sect's purity towards the sword technique. As long as Fang Qixiao displayed his sword technique cultivation, the World Sword Sect would definitely not reject him. However, Chu Xiu didn't expect that Fang Qixiao didn't hide at all and just let himself go. The other martial art practitioners of the World Sword Sect frowned. Luo Shan also didn't say anything for a long time. Xing Jiuyuan, who was at the side, even closed his eyes. Luckily, he didn't really take Fang Qixiao as his disciple. Otherwise, he might not be able to stop himself from strangling him to death. Letting out a long breath, Luo Shan said in a deep voice, "With your strength, it is enough for you to establish a sect in the Daoist. You also have your own understanding of the sword technique. Therefore, I only have one question for you. What do you think is the sword technique?" Fang Qixiao asked in surprise. "The sword technique is the sword technique. What else can it be? Why do you always like to complicate simple things?" Luo Shan was stunned. Then, he laughed and said, "That's right. The sword technique is the sword technique. What else can it be? You are not bad. From today onwards, you are the peak master of the mortal life sword peak of the world's sword sect." When Fang Qixiao heard that, he didn't look happy. After all, he was a man who could already become the master of the Sword King city. No matter how strong the world's sword sect was, a peak master wouldn't make him feel flattered. Therefore, Fang Qixiao only asked seriously, after becoming a peak master, I can visit a brothel, no. Before Fang Qishao could finish his words, Mu Baishuang interrupted him sternly. Mu Baishuang said expressionlessly, "You have entered the World Sword Sect. You represent the face of the World Sword Sect. The World Sword Sect has strict rules. If you really dare to visit a brothel and not pay, the World Sword Sect will have 72 types of sword technique punishments waiting for you." Fang Qishao shrugged and said, "If you can't, then you can't. Why are you so fierce? Such a big sect can't even visit a brothel with your face. That's not much." When these words came out, the faces of all the World Sword Sect martial artists darkened. The reputation of the World Sword Sect, the pinnacle of the Daoist sword path, is it for you to visit a brothel without paying? If this guy in front of them wasn't the peak master of the mortal life sword peak personally appointed by Luo Shan, they couldn't wait to teach him a lesson. Luo Shan rubbed his head and said to Mu Baishuang, "Take him away and teach him the rules of the World Sword Sect." When Fang Qishao was taken away by Mu Baishuang, Sheng Jiuyuan suddenly said to Luo Shan, "Thank you, Sect Master." Luo Shan nodded helplessly and sighed. It's fate. A few days later, in the Kangwu prefecture of the southern barbarians, Chu Xiu also received the news. Chu Xiu was not surprised that Luo Feiheng and Long Longer could sneak under the two prime sovereigns. The two of them were strong and capable, and with Sikong Tan's arrangements, it was almost in the bag. But after listening to Fang Qishao's performance in the sword arena, Chu Xiu wiped off his cold sweat. He wanted the seventh young master Fang to act as himself. He wanted the seventh young master Fang to act as a genius swordsman, the seventh young master Fang to act as himself, and not as a clown. But he actually asked if he could use the name of the World Sword Sect to visit a brothel for free. If it wasn't for the shocking sword talent he displayed, the people of the World Sword Sect would definitely kill this guy who humiliated the World Sword Sect on the spot. Chapter 1322. After successfully infiltrating Fang Qishao and the others into the enemy's territory, Chu Xiu's side could be considered to be at peace. However, Chu Xiu also had a feeling that his intelligence in the Daoist was too little. Apart from being well informed in the East region, he had no source of intelligence in the other three regions. Of course, this was not Chu Xiu's fault, but the Daoist's four regions were severely divided, which was how it was originally. The reason why Sky Devil Palace could plant spies in the World Sword Sects was that they were originally sects in the South region. However, if Sky Devil Palace wanted to plant spies in the East region or the further West or North region, the difficulty could be said to have risen sharply. However, as it happened, Chu Xiu had offended many people all over the four regions, so he urgently needed the intelligence of the entire four regions. He also wanted to investigate some things in the Daoist, so Chu Xiu had his eyes on Sikong Tan again. This time, Chu Xiu did not go to the South region, but used the power of the Heart Demon to call Sikong Tan to the East region. When he walked into Chu Xiu's stronghold in the southern barbaric land, Sikong Tan suddenly felt a chill while he was perturbed. What did he see? The strict and orderly hall was filled with array formations. He also knew array formations, but even he couldn't see through the array formations here. The people coming and going were all martial artists dressed in black with cold expressions. Sikong Tan could feel a dense murderous aura from them, which was definitely not something that could be developed from one or two massacres. Although Sikong Tan was from the southern region, he had dealt with the martial artists of the Imperial Sky Pavilion before. He was sure that the martial artists of the Imperial Sky Pavilion were definitely not like this. This Chu Xiu was in the Imperial Sky Pavilion's territory, but he did not stay in the prefectural governor's office. Instead, he built such a heavily guarded stronghold in the southern barbaric land. Moreover, the martial artists under him were also different from the martial artists of the Imperial Sky Pavilion. What exactly did he want? This was no different from making oneself a king. All this while, Sikong Tan had thought that Chu Xiu was backed by the Imperial Sky Pavilion. But now, it looked like Chu Xiu might only be backed by himself. Filled with apprehension, Sikong Tan carefully stepped into the hall. The lights were dim, and Chu Xiu's figure was hidden in the depths of the darkness. He suddenly said, "Sikong Tan, you've done well this time. Let's write off everything that happened in the exalted divine palace." Sikong Tan jumped in fright, but he immediately said, "Official Chu is too serious. It is this subordinate's honor to be able to work for Official Chu." Chu Xiu waved his hand and said, "I am a person who rewards and punishes clearly. If I don't give you any benefits when you work for me, who will be willing to work for you in the long run? Sikong Tan, you've done well this time, so I won't give you a reward. However, if you do well in what I'm about to ask of you, I can give you far more than you can get by trying to curry favor with those so-called prime sovereigns." With a wave of his hand, Chu Xiu threw out a secret box. "Take a look at what's in here." Puzzled, Sikong Tan opened the box, only to be dazzled by the dazzling contents. Weapons, pills, cultivation methods, materials, and so on were innumerable. Sikong Tan had only taken a cursory glance at the cultivation methods, and he could tell that some of them were secret techniques that had been lost in the great overarching heaven. "Milord, what are you doing?" Chu Xiu said indifferently, "These things are for you to develop the divine armament sect. You're quite capable, but the divine armament sect is inherently weak. It'll be too difficult for you to expand. Consider these things as an advance payment for you. Once the divine armament sect has expanded, you will only have one task, and that is to monitor the southern region, and even the northern and western regions for any news and movements. Also, I need you to help me find something." Sikong Tan hurriedly said, "Please tell me, milord. No matter what it is, this subordinate will definitely find it for milord." "Origin." Sikong Tan was taken aback. "What?" His dumbfounded expression wasn't an act, but he really didn't know what an origin was. In truth, Chu Xiu had already expected this reaction. Given Sikong Tan's realm, it was possible that he really didn't know what an origin was. Among the 5 realms, apart from the mysterious longevity heaven, there should be 8 origins existing in the world. Among the demonic origins, Chu Xiu controlled the demonic origins of descent to the mortal realm, while Dugu Weiwei controlled the demonic origins of Yellow Springs Heaven and Daoist, while the demonic origins of ascended to the mortal realm were nowhere to be found. It was unknown whether it had dissipated during the great ancient calamity, or whether it had been brought to the Daoist. Among the Yang extreme origins, Chu Xiu controlled the Yang extreme origins of descend to the mortal realm, while the Daoist and descend to the mortal realm's Yang extreme origins were nowhere to be found. As for Yellow Springs Heaven, Chu Xiu guessed that there might not be any Yang extreme origins there, and even if there was, it should have been obtained by Dugu Weiwei. Therefore, right now, Chu Xiu had the Yin and Yang essence, while Dugu Weiwei had at least 2 devil essence. At a glance, they could be considered evenly matched. However, the more of these things, the better. Thus, when they were in the lower realm, Chu Xiu had already ordered everyone in the Kunlun Devil cult, as well as Wind Sweeping Tower, to search for clues related to the origin. On the Daoist side, Chu Xiu chose Sikong Tan to investigate. Of course, this was just a test. He didn't really expect Sikong Tan to find the source for him. Origin energy was not something that could be investigated openly. Thus, Chu Xiu pondered for a moment and said, "You can understand the existence of origin energy as a natural treasure. It has both yin and yang, but it cannot be replicated. Its main body was a very unremarkable wisp of devil chi, or a wisp of golden light, but it contained extremely powerful power. Currently, among the Daoist people, only the experts standing at the peak know about the existence of the origin. Therefore, you don't need to search for it on a grand scale. You just need to follow these characteristics and clues to track it down. This kind of thing can be done slowly. There's no need to rush." Sikong Tan memorized all of these characteristics and promptly said, "Yes, this subordinate will remember." At this moment, Mei Qinglian suddenly walked in and handed Chu Xiu an invitation card. She said, "Someone gave this to you and entrusted the Imperial Sky Pavilion to pass it to you. An invitation for the Ancient Venerables Conference? A primordial ultimate god?" There were only a few words on the invitation card. It was an invitation for the Ancient Venerables Conference and was signed by a primordial ultimate god. However, each word on the invitation card contained an extremely powerful power, as though it was written with the laws of heaven and earth. It was extremely strange and could not be replicated. What is the Ancient Venerables Conference? Who is a primordial ultimate god? Chu Xiu mumbled. Sikong Tan subconsciously said, "The Ancient Venerables Conference is," however, as soon as the words left his mouth, Sikong Tan felt something was wrong. Wasn't Chu Xiu the Ancient Venerable successor? Why didn't he know about the Ancient Venerables Conference? Why didn't he know about the Ancient Venerables Conference? Sikong Tan had carefully investigated Chu Xiu after returning from the Daoist Divine Palace because he was afraid of Chu Xiu. At that time, he felt that Chu Xiu's actions did not seem like something an Ancient Venerable successor would do. He developed his forces in a high-profile manner and had no interest in being a hermit cultivator. Instead, he dominated the Jianghu. Moreover, although he claimed to be the Ancient Venerable successor, no one knew which lineage he belonged to. Even the Ancient Venerables behind him had only made a move once to stop Yi Weikong of Cold River City. However, no one had seen his face that time. Thinking of Chu Xiu's unfamiliarity with the Ancient Venerables today, Sikong Tan couldn't help but have a bold guess, one that made him shudder. Sikong Tan subconsciously looked up and saw Chu Xiu looking at him with an indecipherable look in his eyes. "You've guessed it?" Sikong Tan shuddered violently and shook his head. "This subordinate is slow-witted. This subordinate doesn't know anything." Chu Xiu casually waved his hand. "Don't worry, since you're already one of my people, it's better to know than to be clueless about some things. At least you know who you're working for. Now tell me, who are the primordial ultimate gods and the primordial ultimate gods in this Ancient Venerables Conference?" Sikong Tan carefully said, "I heard this from Yuan Fu. He said that although the Ancient Venerables seemed to be hermit cultivators and rarely contacted each other, they each had their own connections and would communicate with each other. They broke away from the sects of the Jianghu and formed their own system. The Ancient Venerables Conference is a place where all the Ancient Venerables are connected. The date of the Ancient Venerables Conference is not fixed. It could be a decade, a few decades, or even 100 years. In short, the Ancient Venerables Conference is usually held when something big is about to happen. Apart from discussing matters, people can also exchange some things during the Ancient Venerables Conference. As for the Primordial Ultimate Gods Conference, this person is not well known in the Jianghu, but he is a peak 9th Heaven Martial Immortal Peak Prime God. He is also the most low-key among the Ancient Venerables and has not stepped into the Jianghu for hundreds of years. The only time he has shown his face is during the Ancient Venerables Conference. The Ancient Venerables Conference always has an organizer. The primordial ultimate god is highly respected and has never fought with others. Therefore, he has been the organizer for hundreds of years. Chu Xiu nodded and asked, "Where is the Ancient Venerables Conference held?" "At the peak of the East Sea, the Immortal Island." Chu Xiu waved his hand and dismissed Sikong Tan. Sikong Tan immediately left as if he had been pardoned. Mei Qinglian suddenly frowned and said, "This is troublesome. Are you going or not? If you don't go, it will arouse suspicion." Chu Xiu said, "Of course I'm going. Among the Daoist people, the top sects are a circle, and so are these Ancient Venerables. Only those who have become martial immortals are qualified to step into this circle and decide the direction of the Daoist people. If I don't blend in, I will always be an outsider. How can I know so much? But if you choose to go, who can you let go? Old Man Wei? Although Old Man Wei is a martial immortal, he is not as strong as you." Chu Xiu pointed to himself and said, "Why should I let Old Man Wei go? Don't forget that the invitation was sent to the ancient venerables. I have already stepped into the martial immortal realm and become the new generation's ancient venerables. My master retired and gave up his position. Is that not enough? Mei Qinglian only realized after hearing Chu Xiu's words. With Chu Xiu's current strength, he no longer needed to pretend to be the ancient venerable successor. He could already become a real ancient venerables. Chapter 1323. Before Chu Xiu became a martial immortal, he had to use the name of a primeval lord successor no matter what he did. Now that he was a martial immortal, he was a primeval lord and there were no more restrictions on what he could do. After instructing Mei Qinglian and the others to guard the Daoist island, Chu Xiu headed to the East Sea's Fairy Island alone. Only primeval lords and their successors could participate in the ancient sovereign assembly. Since Chu Xiu was going as a primeval lord, he could not bring anyone else. It was Chu Xiu's first time going to the Daoist's overseas territory. Compared to the many martial arts forces in the lower realms' overseas territory, the Daoist East Sea did not have any prominent sections. Only a few inconspicuous small sects and a few primeval lords occupied the island to cultivate. The reason was simple: the Daoist territory was much larger than the lower realm and there was still a large area that had yet to be explored. Why would they want to waste their time in the overseas territory? They would not be interested in such a place. The location of the Fairy Island was easy to find. The place with the thickest fog was the so-called Fairy Island to the east of the estuary. Chu Xiu rode on the waves and traveled for a full 3 days. His surroundings were already shrouded in thick fog. But in the endless fog, there was an island vaguely visible in the center. Upon closer inspection, there were countless tall buildings, palaces, and pavilions on the island. It was like a fairyland amidst the fog. No wonder it was called the Fairy Island. Several primeval lords had arrived at the same time as Chu Xiu. A gentle young Daoist priest in a Daoist robe walked up and greeted Chu Xiu. I'm Lin Xiaoyao, a primordial ultimate god disciple. Greetings, senior. Please show me your invitation. The young Daoist priest in front of him looked very young. He looked like he was in his 20s if not for his cultivation technique. However, the aura on his body was incomparably deep. Although he was only at the true fire spirit refinement realm, his aura was stronger than that of the heaven and earth profound understanding realm. Chu Xiu handed the invitation over. Lin Xiaoyao was surprised when he saw the name on it. So it's Senior Chu Xiu. I've heard a lot about you. Please come in. The other prime sovereigns also looked at Chu Xiu curiously. In truth, these reclusive prime sovereigns didn't really like gossip and didn't know much about it. It was because Chu Xiu was too famous during this period of time. Not only had he killed 3 primeval venerable successors in the exalted divine palace, he had also humiliated the world's sword sects and killed the Brahma sect's Vishnu palace lord. During his trip to the exalted divine palace, Chu Xiu had offended almost half of the Jianghu and could be said to be extremely high profile. Coupled with his identity as a primeval venerable successor, he had attracted so much attention. Even Meng Xinghe, who only roamed the eastern region, wasn't as high profile as Chu Xiu in the past. The other prime sovereigns couldn't figure out Chu Xiu's background. They weren't hostile, but they didn't have any goodwill either. They all sized him up and followed Chu Xiu into the main hall of the Immortal Island. There were already many primeval venerables in the main hall, and most of them had brought their successors. There were more than 30 of them in total. But before Chu Xiu could take a closer look, an angry voice suddenly sounded, Chu Xiu. How dare you come to the Primeval Sovereign Conference? Chu Xiu looked up and saw that the speaker was Su Tianya. Fang Baidu was also looking at him with vigilance and hostility from the side. However, Chu Xiu's eyes weren't on the two of them, but on Luo Feiheng and Long Longer behind them. Compared to before, Luo Feiheng and Long Longer's auras were even stronger. It seemed that the two primeval venerables were really training them as successors. Long Longer and Luo Feiheng didn't expect to see Chu Xiu so soon. Long Longer immediately put on a hostile look, but Luo Feiheng did not change his expression as quickly as she did. He could only keep a straight face and remain expressionless. I received an invitation, why wouldn't I dare to come? Chu Xiu said indifferently. Then where is your master? Su Tianya snorted. Ever since you appeared in the martial world, you've always claimed to be the successor of the primeval venerables, but no one knows which bloodline you're from. Sneaky, secretive, and sneaky. You're the only one who came to the primeval sovereign conference. Who is your master? If you have no ulterior motives, why do you hide your identity like this? After Su Tianya and the others parted with Mu Baishuang, Mu Baishuang's words suddenly reminded them of something they had always neglected, Chu Xiu's identity. Therefore, they used their connections and investigated a lot of information, but they still couldn't find out which bloodline Chu Xiu was from. Perhaps he was one of those unknown hermits from ancient times, but Chu Xiu's behavior was extremely strange. At the very least, he didn't seem to be a successor of the primeval venerables. The other primeval venerables also looked over when they heard the quarrel between the two. Communication between primeval venerables was also very rare, but where there were people, there would be conflicts. Therefore, disputes between primeval venerable successors were a common occurrence. It was just that Chu Xiu had killed all of his opponent's disciples and almost wiped out his entire bloodline. It was rare for someone to form such an irreconcilable grudge. What a joke! Chu Xiu sneered. Who do you think you are? Why should I confess my identity to you? Su Tianya, don't forget that I'm now a third-layer martial immortal. I've officially become a primeval venerable, not a successor. So my master has already abdicated and I'm in charge of my bloodline. What's wrong with that? Your disciple didn't live up to expectations and tried to kill me in the exalted divine palace. I spared him once, but he didn't know what was good for him. That's why I said that he deserved to die. According to the rules of the exalted divine palace, life and death are not discussed, but now you've come to make trouble for me. What bullshit divine dragon subduing general? You're just a sore loser. Why bother roaming the martial world if you're afraid of death? Why enter the exalted divine palace? Wouldn't it be safer to hide in the forests and never come out? Chu Xiu's words were full of mockery and didn't leave any face for Su Tianya. This immediately made the short-tempered Su Tianya explode. He couldn't care less where he was. A deafening dragon roar erupted around him. As he threw a punch, the surrounding space began to distort and the laws were squeezed and torn apart by the extreme power. Facing Su Tianya's punch, Chu Xiu sneered and unleashed the holy demon invincible form. He also threw a punch. The two fists collided and immediately erupted with a deafening shockwave. Su Tianya had the strength of a fourth-layer martial immortal, but Chu Xiu wasn't afraid of him in terms of pure strength. With true fire as his foundation, and now that Chu Xiu had cultivated the holy demon invincible form, the strength of his physical body could be said to have reached a true peak. Behind Chu Xiu, a piercing golden Buddhist light fused with a deep, pitch-black demon chi, turning into a demon Buddha with 3 heads and 6 arms. It had the solemnity of the power of Buddhism, as well as the fierceness and violence of the power of demon Tao. The strange demon Buddha's 6 arms smashed down. Around Su Tianya, the dragon roared furiously and the dragon swung its tail. The might seemed to be able to tear a mountain apart. But under Chu Xiu's demon Buddha, his dragon tail was directly smashed down by a punch. Then, the 6 arms smashed down one after another with terrifying might. At that moment, Su Tianya finally understood how Yin Tuoluo felt in the past. Previously, when Su Tianya saw Yin Tuoluo being suppressed by Chu Xiu, he thought that Yin Tuoluo, the deputy palace master of Shiva Palace, was just an empty title. But when it was his turn to fight against Chu Xiu, he could feel the strong pressure and the powerful attack that made him breathless. The six-armed demon Buddha's punches landed one after another, and Su Tianya's dragon body couldn't even raise its head. Fang Baidu, who was at the side, saw that something was wrong. He immediately formed a seal and a pure white moonlight suddenly appeared in the palace. It broke through the surrounding space and enveloped Chu Xiu. The secret technique of Venerable Gu Yu's lineage was very mystical. It seemed to be able to affect the operation of the power of space, forcibly tearing apart Chu Xiu's body. If it weren't for the fact that Chu Xiu's holy demon indestructible body was indeed very powerful, he might have been torn apart by the power of this technique. In the six-armed demon Buddha behind him, the two arms that belonged to the power of the demonic path began to form seals. Fang Baidu was shocked to find that a demonic shadow had appeared under his feet out of nowhere. It had integrated into the shadow under his feet and was constantly assimilating his power. Creation Heavenly Demon, the original demonic technique that could dissolve all kinds of power. Ever since the Bliss Demon Palace's inheritance of this path was severed, the Daoist warriors hadn't seen the power of the creation demonic path for a long time. Fang Baidu didn't know how to deal with this strange power. He could only expand the moonlight around him. The power of laws floated around him and created a space that belonged solely to him. He prevented the power of the creation demonic path from corroding his own power. He was in a stalemate with it. Two fourth heavenly layer martial immortals were fighting against Chu Xiu, a mere third heavenly layer martial immortal. Yet, they were actually in a stalemate. In fact, they even faintly felt like they were being suppressed by their opponent. This shocked the surrounding warriors who were seeing Chu Xiu for the first time. Chu Xiu's battle prowess was simply astonishing. Right at that moment, an aged voice suddenly sounded. "All of you, stop. We haven't seen each other for decades or even centuries. How can we fight each other the moment we see each other? We are all martial immortals who stand at the peak of the Daoist realm. What's the point of flaunting your pride like children?" Following that voice, a mystical rhythm fused with the laws and spread out. Wherever it passed, Chu Xiu was shocked to discover that regardless of whether it was his indestructible holy demon body or the creation demonic Tao, they were all assimilated into the source of demonic qi and Buddhist light, dissipating in mid-air. To be exact, it wasn't assimilation. Instead, it was returning to its original state, returning to its original state. It was the same for Su Tianya and Fang Baidu. Their powers had all been returned to their original state. The three of them had no choice but to stop fighting. At that moment, an old man and a young man wearing a Daoist robe embroidered with clouds and stars stepped into the palace. Chapter 13:24. Of the two people who walked into the hall, the elder appeared extremely old. His hair and beard were all white, and the wrinkles on his face almost covered his eyes. His body was as hunched as a shrimp. However, when everyone saw him appear, their eyes revealed a trace of respect, and their bodies slightly leaned forward to show their respect. Needless to say, Chu Xiu knew that this old man was the initiator of the ancient Venerate Conference. He was also the oldest primordial god Wuxia Xianxia among the present primordial gods. Before coming here, Chu Xiu had inquired about Wuxia Xianxia's information, but it was not much. That was because the primordial god Wuxia Xianxia kept a very low profile. He rarely came out of the Jianghu and did not participate in the Jianghu's disputes, even among the primordial gods. Every time the ancient Venerate Conference was held, the primordial god Wuxia Xianxia's attitude was very fair and impartial. After a long time, he naturally won the respect of many primordial gods. At least when facing such an old man, one would not feel any hostility toward him. Of course, it was useless even if one felt hostility toward him. The old man in front of him, who looked so old and frail as if he was on the verge of death, was a genuine expert of the ninth heaven of martial immortal realm. He stood at the pinnacle of the exalted major and was comparable to the Tao ancestors. He was also the face of the primeval sovereigns. Chu Xiu felt that he could not resist the power of the primordial god Wuxia Xianxia's attack just now even if he used all his trump cards. Everyone present had a strange look in their eyes when they saw the young man behind Wuxia Xianxia. Chu Xiu also noticed the young man. He was dressed like a Daoist priest and wore an extremely gorgeous Daoist robe with star patterns. It turned out to be a rare treasure with the starlight power on it as if a galaxy had been refined into it. His aura was not weaker than Wuxia Xianxia's, but it was extremely reserved. However, there was not the slightest emotion in his eyes, only a boundless galaxy, profound, vicissitudes, and unfathomable. Wuxia Xianxia walked to Chu Xiu's side, paused for a moment, then grinned and said, "Not bad, young man. We prime sovereigns have been living in seclusion, but in reality, we have also lost our drive, so there are very few young people who can stand out. You have made a name for yourself in the outside world and represent the entire prime sovereign lineage. Not bad." Chu Xiu bowed his head and said, "Senior is overpraising me." The young Daoist priest also glanced at Chu Xiu. However, there was a boundless galaxy revolving around his eyes, and there was no change in his expression. There was only a trace of a gentle smile that seemed to never change, making it impossible for others to guess what he was thinking. Wuxia Xianxia then turned his gaze towards Su Tianya, shook his head and said, "You martial artists of the dragon-subduing divine general's lineage are always so hot-tempered. Actually, upon reaching the martial immortal realm, your control over the power of your cultivation techniques has reached the pinnacle. Your cultivation techniques will no longer affect your state of mind. The ones that will affect your state of mind will be yourselves. Dragons could soar above the 9 heavens, and they could also hide in the 9 abyss. I was there before your master passed away, and he told me that the dragon-subduing divine general and the dragon-subduing divine general are not referring to your cultivation techniques, but yourself. When you can subdue this dragon, in your heart, then you will be considered complete." Su Tianya did not dare to refute. He hurriedly cupped his hands and said, "Thank you for your guidance, Supreme Divinity." Wuxia Xianxia then turned his gaze to Feng Baidu. "Your lineage of Venerable Guyu and the dragon-subduing divine general's lineage complement each other, but I hope that you can complement each other not only in cultivation techniques, but also in character. Sharing life and death is commendable, but you must also remember that you should not allow one party to act impulsively, while you accompany him in acting impulsively." Feng Baidu lowered his head obediently and said, "Thank you for your guidance, Supreme Divinity." Wuxia Xianxia slowly walked forward and sat on the main seat. He said in a deep voice, "Everyone, there are actually 2 things that I would like to inform everyone of in this ancient venerable meeting. The first is that there is a problem with the formation seal between the lower realm and the Daoist. The formation seal in the lower realm has disappeared, and it won't be long before the lower realm and the Daoist are completely connected." Upon hearing this, the crowd was stunned for a moment, then began to whisper and discuss excitedly. After a while, when everyone's voices had quieted down, Wuxia Xianxia continued, "I'm sure everyone is aware of the impact of this matter, so I won't say more. We have not returned to the ancestral land for 10,000 years, and we do not know what is in the ancestral land in the lower realm. It may be dangerous, but it could also be an opportunity. Not all of us from the ancient venerable lineage want to stay in the mountains and forests to cultivate. I know this. Therefore, if we can return to the ancestral land this time, the major Daoist sects have promised us that we can establish a sect at will. They will not stop us and will even support us. The interests of the 4 Daoist regions are already fixed. If we establish a sect, we will invade their interests and snatch food from the mouths of the top sections. They will not agree, but in the ancestral land in the lower realm, there are not so many rules." The ancient venerables were taken aback by these words, then fell silent again. Everyone's eyes were filled with contemplation. Establish a sect? It wasn't that no ancient venerable had ever thought of this, but very few had actually done it. For them, establishing a top sect was equivalent to snatching food from the mouths of the top sects of the other 4 regions. There was bound to be a fight. Establishing a small sect was meaningless to them. It was better to be a virtuous ancient venerable and focus all their energy and resources on passing down their legacies. With the opportunity to enter the lower realm and the promise of the top sects, the ancient venerable lineages were worthy of careful consideration. To the side, Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes in thought, but what he was thinking about was what would happen after the upper and lower realms were connected. Chu Xiu had been unaware of the Daoist's reaction. But now, it seemed that the Daoist side hadn't made any unnecessary moves and had instead chosen to cautiously wait for the formation to collapse on its own in order to preserve the exalted divine palace. After all, the exalted divine palace had been built 10,000 years ago by gathering the power of all the cultivators of the lower realms. Even though the ceiling formation had been destroyed, the exalted divine palace was still intact and could still be used for cultivation. Moreover, if anything happened to the lower realm, the Daoist sects could rebuild the formation with the exalted divine palace as the center. After everyone had digested this information, Wuxia Xianxia continued, as for the second matter, it is an internal affair of the ancient venerables. I'm old and have presided over several ancient venerables conventions. When my disciple died in an accident, it took me a long time to find Xiaoyao to be my disciple. Therefore, I don't have the time or energy to manage the affairs of the ancient venerables lineage. I recommend Xinghe to be the next organizer of the ancient venerables conventions and the leading figure of the ancient venerables lineage. With that, Wuxia Xianxia pointed to the young Daoist sitting to his right. His words stirred a commotion among the crowd, and there were all sorts of words of persuasion and persuasion. Chu Xiu's expression changed drastically. He'd had his suspicions before, but now he was certain that the young Daoist was Xinghe unfettered, Meng Xinghe, the renowned ancient venerables of the outside world. Chu Xiu had no grudge against Meng Xinghe, but he did have a grudge against Yi Weikong of Frigid River City. Previously, Chu Xiu had schemed against Yi Weikong and severely injured him. Therefore, Chu Xiu could vaguely guess Meng Xinghe's attitude towards him. However, Meng Xinghe was much stronger than Yi Weikong. Both of them were several hundred years old. Although Yi Weikong hadn't entered his twilight years, his vitality was no longer increasing. Meng Xinghe, on the other hand, was still able to maintain his youthful appearance. This wasn't the result of using some secret technique, but the abnormally rich vitality in his body. What Meng Xinghe was displaying now was his true age. According to his overall lifespan, Meng Xinghe was currently in the prime of his life. Wuxia Xianxia couldn't help but shake his head when he saw the crowd urging him to stay. Everyone, I've made up my mind. I really don't want to sit in this position anymore. Xinghe is already a peak expert of the 9th heaven of martial immortal. Even if I go all out, I'm still no match for him. With him representing us, Gu Zun's bloodline, we'll have more confidence when talking to those from the major sections. This time, when the lower realms formation was destroyed, Xinghe represented me in the discussion with the top experts of the major sections. Now that he's sitting in this position, he deserves it. Among the Daoist people, the 9th heaven of martial immortal represented an expert that stood at the absolute peak. There were less than 10 such existences in the entire Daoist. There were Daoist sects, Buddhist sects, and sword sections. If Gu Zun's bloodline wanted to talk to them on equal terms, they naturally needed an expert like that. This person used to be Wuxia Xianxia, and now it was Meng Xinghe. With Wuxia Xianxia's recommendation and Meng Xinghe's strength, no one present objected. They couldn't find any reason to. Wuxia Xianxia casually waved his hand and said, "All right, that's all I want to say. Everyone, please feel free to trade as you please." One of the highlights of the ancient sovereign convention was when the prime sovereigns casually traded cultivation techniques, items, and discussed martial arts. This segment was relatively peaceful. However, Chu Xiu's side was very quiet. Most people cast strange glances at Chu Xiu, but no one went over. For Chu Xiu, there were only two kinds of people present. One was those who had a grudge against him, and the other was someone he didn't know. Needless to say, the other prime sovereigns didn't know Chu Xiu well either. They didn't have any friendship with him, so what was there to trade with? Moreover, it was rumored that Chu Xiu was ruthless and ruthless. He had killed 3 prime sovereign successors in a row. Such rumors naturally made people stay away from him. However, at that moment, a black-clothed burly man walked toward Chu Xiu. Chapter 1325. The burly man who suddenly walked towards Chu Xiu was about as strong as Chu Xiu, a 4th firmament martial immortal. The burly man smiled and said, "I am Qi Lianhai, a descendant of the vacant mountain demon Venerable." Chu Xiu cupped his fists and said, "So it's Brother Qi. However, you still dare to approach me in such a situation?" Qi Lianhai glanced at Su Tianya and the others and said, "Why not? I'm not afraid of Su Tianya and Fang Baidu. Moreover, I've long disliked these 2 fellows. They aren't very strong, so they will team up and fight with numbers. Don't you think it's disgusting for 2 grown men to be together all day long? Besides, I have to thank you, Brother Chu, for helping me take revenge for my sect." Chu Xiu was surprised and said, "Oh. I helped you take revenge for your sect? May I ask who your sect's enemy is?" Qi Lianhai sneered and said, "It's the Bliss Demon Palace. In fact, my lineage was originally from the Blissful Demon Palace, but due to the difference in cultivation methods and ideologies, we were suppressed by the former palace lord of the Blissful Demon Palace. Left with no choice, we could only leave the Blissful Demon Palace and become a rogue cultivator. To put it nicely, my bloodline is also a prime venerable, but in reality, we are just stray dogs. It's a pity that the Blissful Devil Palace has always been a major Devil Dao sect in the southern region. Even if my bloodline wanted to take revenge, they couldn't find a way to do so. Luckily, Brother Chu, you helped us take revenge." Chu Xiu nodded and said, "No need to be so polite, Brother Qi. Why did you come to me this time?" Chu Xiu wasn't naive enough to think that Qi Lianhai came to him just to thank him. It had been a long time since he destroyed the Bliss Demon Palace. Why hadn't he seen anyone come to him to thank him? Qi Lianhai disregarded everyone else's opinions and rushed to get close to him. He must have some ulterior motive. Qi Lianhai waved his hand and said, "In that case, I won't waste any more time. I came to you to trade a portion of the Bliss Demon Palace's cultivation techniques. After the Blissful Devil Palace was destroyed, these things should have fallen into the hands of Brother Chu and the Heavenly Devil Palace. However, if I were to go to the Heavenly Devil Palace with my identity, even if my bloodline has a grudge against the Blissful Devil Palace, the Heavenly Devil Palace might not believe me. Therefore, I can only come to you, Brother Chu. As for the items to be traded, I believe Brother Chu will need them." "What is it?" Qi Lianhai said solemnly, "Heavenly Demon Creation Scripture. In the past, my ancestor had a falling out with the Blissful Demon Palace's Palace Lord because my ancestor was going to look for the Blissful Demon Palace's Devil Dao of Creation. But back then, everyone in the Bliss Demon Palace had already given up on the Creation Demon Dao and walked on the path that they thought was correct. Instead, they labeled my ancestral master as a heretic. When I saw Brother Chu attack by Du just now, you used the power of the Fortune Heavenly Devil. Brother Chu, you must have obtained it from the Blissful Devil Palace, right? The power of the Fortune Heavenly Devil is the ultimate power that can reach the pinnacle of the Great Tao. However, it is too obscure, difficult to understand, and extremely difficult to cultivate. Even though I have reached the martial immortal realm, I dare not say that I have comprehended the power of the Fortune Heavenly Devil. The Heavenly Demon Creation Scripture is my ancestors' understanding of the power of the Fortune Heavenly Devil. I believe it will be very useful to Brother Chu." After listening, Chu Xiu didn't even think about it before nodding and saying, "Yes." Chu Xiu had great confidence in the power of the Fortune Heavenly Devil. Although his understanding of the power could only be regarded as rudimentary, if he could truly master it, the power of the Fortune Heavenly Devil could help him reach the pinnacle of the demonic Tao. After the smooth exchange, Qi Lianhai glanced to the side and suddenly whispered to Chu Xiu, "Brother Chu, you're a straightforward person and a rare demonic cultivator among the prime sovereigns. You and I can be considered to walk the same path. I have to remind you of one thing, be careful of one person." "Who?" "Meng Xinghe." Qi Lianhai's voice sounded a little sad. The primordial ultimate god was the leader of the ancient sovereign bloodline. Although he didn't do anything beneficial to the ancient sovereign bloodline, he was always fair and didn't harm anyone's interests. That's why we admire him. However, things are a little complicated with Meng Xinghe. I've dealt with him before, and he's definitely not as simple as he appears to be. I just hope he doesn't bring the entire ancient sovereign bloodline into the abyss. Brother Chu, I've heard about your dispute with Cold River City in the Eastern Territory. The friendship between Meng Xinghe and Yi Weikong is definitely beyond your imagination. Now that he has become the leader of the ancient sovereign bloodline, Brother Chu, you'd better be careful." Qi Lianhai had just finished speaking when Meng Xinghe suddenly walked towards them, causing Qi Lianhai's expression to change slightly. He had just used the power of laws to transmit his voice. Unless the other party had comprehended the same power of laws, they shouldn't have been able to hear it. Qi Lianhai secretly blamed himself for talking too much. He immediately bade farewell to Chu Xiu and turned to leave. Chu Xiu looked at Qi Lianhai in a slightly astonished manner. Exactly what did Meng Xinghe do back then for this 4th-level martial immortal expert to be so afraid? Meng Xinghe walked up to Chu Xiu with a faint smile on his face and said in a gentle voice, "Chu, I've heard a lot about you." Chu Xiu said indifferently, "What wanderer Meng heard should be cursing me, right?" Meng Xinghe laughed and said, "I can feel that you're a little hostile towards me, Chu. Is it because of Yi Weikong? I built Cold River City with Yi Weikong in the past, but Cold River City doesn't belong to me. I'm Xinghe Wanderer, not the Lord of Cold River City. From the day I chose to leave Cold River City and became a prime sovereign, I actually had nothing to do with Cold River City. If I still wanted to help Cold River City, then it wouldn't be High Heaven Sect but Cold River City that dominates the Eastern Territory now." With that said, Meng Xinghe glanced at Chu Xiu and said, "You may think I'm boasting, but I never like to boast. No one in High Heaven Sect can stop me, even if they use the High Heaven Wuji seal." Meng Xinghe's words didn't contain much conceit. There was only self-confidence, extreme self-confidence. Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes and said, "So even if I schemed against Cold River City and Yi Weikong was seriously injured, Wanderer Meng won't vent his anger on me?" Meng Xinghe shook his head and said, "Of course not. It's not necessary. Yi Weikong is very stubborn, and I'm also very stubborn. He has his path, and I have mine. If I interfere in his affairs, it's equivalent to deviating from the path I chose. Similarly, Yi Weikong understood me and understood me. He had never come to look for me after so many years. Now you are a prime sovereign, and I am also a prime sovereign. What we should talk about shouldn't be the matters of the underworld, but the matters between us prime sovereigns." "Oh? What does Wanderer Meng want to talk about?" "Although I'm not the weakest among all the prime sovereigns present, I'm not the strongest either. My seniority is also the lowest." Meng Xinghe said in a deep voice, "Chu, you cultivate Taoism, Buddhism, and demonic Tao at the same time. What do you think about sectarian bias?" Chu Xiu was a little confused by Meng Xinghe's words. Sectarian bias? This was something all cultivators knew. Why did Meng Xinghe ask this? Chu Xiu thought about it and said, "The so-called sectarian bias is just different camps. It's naturally inappropriate for Buddhist cultivators to cultivate demonic arts because they are first and foremost Buddhist disciples. This status restricts them. If you don't have sectarian bias, then it's very simple. You just need to treat yourself as a pure cultivator. Whether it's Buddhist martial arts or demonic martial arts, it's all martial arts. Why can't you cultivate both?" Meng Xinghe nodded in satisfaction. You're right, Chu. It's precisely because of sectarian bias that the path of martial arts in the underworld sometimes stagnates. I have an idea. Let's gather the strength of us prime sovereigns and share our cultivation techniques. The descendants of us prime sovereigns and the major sects of the underworld can all enter to cultivate. It doesn't matter one's background, only one's martial Dao. I wonder if Chu is interested? Chu Xiao was dumbfounded that Meng Xinghe had come to talk to him about this matter. He didn't know what the other party was thinking. In all fairness, Meng Xinghe's idea was actually pretty good. Martial Dao that was stagnant would only get weaker and weaker. Giving up on sectarian bias so that everyone could study martial Dao together was actually a good thing. However, Chu Xiao didn't trust Meng Xinghe. Even if Ning Xuanji had said this, Chu Xiao would believe it. However, Chu Xiao didn't believe Meng Xinghe. Regardless of whether he was hostile toward Chu Xiao or not, Chu Xiao was currently wary of him. This loose cultivator of the Milky Way galaxy, whose name had shaken the world hundreds of years ago, had a warm smile on his face. His entire body exuded a gentle aura. However, Chu Xiao could sense a trace of danger from him. In the end, Chu Xiao just smiled and said, "I admire unfettered Meng's courage to be the first in the world. However, this matter is very important. Although I've taken over as prime sovereign, I still need to go back and discuss it with my master." Meng Xinghe nodded and said, "In that case, I won't disturb Chu any further." After saying that, Meng Xinghe didn't insist. He walked directly to the others and said something. It should also be about this matter. The prime sovereign meeting ended after a day. After all, there were only more than 20 prime sovereigns present at the end. Including the successors, there were less than 100 people. One day was enough for the transaction. Before leaving, Chu Xiao wanted to find a chance to ask Long Longer and Luo Feiheng how they were doing, but he didn't find the opportunity. Su Tianya and Fang Baidu had lost their disciples. Now that they had finally found new disciples that they were satisfied with, they naturally treasured them very much. However, it didn't matter. Chu Xiao could tell from their appearance that they were progressing smoothly. Chapter 1326. After the end of the ancient venerable meeting, Su Tianya and the others did not bother him again. One reason was that they dared not. With the strength Chu Xiao had shown, they would not be able to defeat Chu Xiao unless the two of them attacked together. Moreover, whether it was the veteran primordial ultimate god expert or Meng Xinghe who was the new primordial ultimate god successor, they needed to be cautious. They really dared not act recklessly on such an occasion. After returning to the southern barbaric land, Chu Xiao didn't understand what Meng Xinghe's words meant, so he simply didn't bother to think about it. Instead, he went into closed-door cultivation to study the creation demonic Dao. The creation heavenly demon scripture that Qi Lianhai gave to Chu Xiao was passed down by the patriarch of his lineage after spending a lifetime of effort and gathering the efforts of several generations. Although it was impossible to directly deduce the creation demonic path to its peak, it still benefited Chu Xiao a lot. At that time, in the closed-door cultivation secret room, Chu Xiao was surrounded by black demon energy. It was so dense that it seemed to have turned into a substance. The dense demon energy penetrated into the surrounding heaven and earth law and evolved into earth, wind, water, and fire. In the end, it even directly turned the secret room where Chu Xiao was in into a devil's cave as if it was a miniature primitive devil's cave. The next moment, the dense demon energy was taken back into Chu Xiao's body and the miniature primitive devil's cave also dissipated. Chu Xiao breathed a sigh of relief with a hint of joy in his eyes. Previously, Tianhan had told Chu Xiao that Dugu Weiwei's domain could directly attack the origin of the demonic path. It could be said that his domain was a primitive devil's cave. The path that Chu Xiao took was already different from Dugu Weiwei's, but at that time, he achieved the same effect by relying on the creation demonic path. At least in terms of the starting point of demonic path, Chu Xiu had already walked on a different path from Dugu Weiwei. Chu Xiu called out the inner demon in his mind and said, I will not only trick you into doing things. I said before that as long as my cultivation level in the creation demonic path improves, I can create a perfect body for you. Now, with my attainments in the creation demonic path, as long as there is enough blood essence, I can create a body for you. Mental demon had the memories of many warriors. He had always been waiting for the day he could truly become an adult. He had even resented Chu Xiu for standing him up time and time again. However, after waiting for Chu Xiu's promise, he was not as anxious. Hearing that, the inner demon asked, if I reconstruct my body, what realm can my power reach? Chu Xiu said, Qi, blood, and spirit are the foundation of the body. You are spirit. As long as I can obtain enough qi and blood of experts in the heaven and earth mysterious opening realm, I can create a body for you in the heaven and earth mysterious opening realm. The inner demon asked excitedly, what about the martial immortal realm? Chu Xiu shook his head and said, don't even think about the martial immortal realm. Let's not talk about where I can kill martial immortals for you to bleed. The true power of a martial immortal lies in their control over the power of rules. The strongest warriors' memories that you devoured were only in the heaven and earth mysterious opening realm. So, you can only control the power of the heaven and earth mysterious opening realm. Even if I really create a body of a martial immortal, it will only be an empty shell. The inner demon nodded and thought for a while before saying, I have no idea yet. I'll tell you when I understand. Now that the opportunity had finally come, the inner demon was no longer anxious. This time, Chu Xiu spent over 3 months in seclusion to study the demonic path of creation. Originally, he was going to continue his seclusion, but coincidentally, someone knocked on the formation, reminding Chu Xiu that something had happened. When Chu Xiu came out of seclusion, Mei Qinglian immediately walked up and said, that fatty Sikong Tan is here. He said he found a clue about the source. When Chu Xiu heard that, he was taken aback. His first reaction wasn't joy, but he felt that Sikong Tan must have found the wrong thing. An existence like the source was definitely a treasure among treasures. It might even be kept by some top sections. How could Sikong Tan find it in such a short time? Chu Xiu didn't believe that the fatty would be so powerful. When Chu Xiu called Sikong Tan over, the fatty immediately cupped his hands and said in a flattering manner, I haven't seen Lord for a while. Lord's cultivation has improved again. The peak of the 9th heavenly layer can be said to be within your reach. Although Chu Xiu did have some gains during his seclusion, with Sikong Tan's eyesight, he couldn't tell whether Chu Xiu had improved or regressed. He was purely sucking up out of habit. Chu Xiu waved his hand and said, that's enough. Stop sucking up to me. I heard that you really found clues to the origin source. Sikong Tan nodded and said, according to the information Lord gave me, I have 90% certainty that it should be the source. However, I haven't seen the real thing, so I can't be certain. Oh? Who is in possession of the source? It's in the hands of the Sanskrit sect. Sikong Tan said in a low voice, it's like this. After I took the resources Lord gave me, I expanded the divine machine gate. At the same time, I sent my trusted disciples to the western and northern regions to open up information channels. One of my disciples was even more ruthless. He actually shaved his head and became a monk, entering a small temple in the western regions. In the western regions, besides the 2 major Buddhist sects, the Tianluo Treasure Temple and the Sanskrit sect, there are also countless small temples belonging to the Sanskrit sect and the Zen sect. My disciple joined a temple belonging to the Zen sect and has a very close relationship with the Tianluo Treasure Temple. It also has a rather long history. He read a story in the Sutra Pavilion of that small temple. It said that after the Tianluo Treasure Temple and the Sanskrit sect entered the Daoist continent, they once fought over something and started a war. Chu Xiu said in a low voice, but according to my knowledge, the 2 sects have always been at odds with each other in the lower dimensions, and it can be said to be extremely common for both sides to start a great battle over the same thing. How can you be sure that what they're fighting over is the source energy? Sikong Tan explained, because of that fight, even some small temples in the western regions were implicated. The temple that my disciple belongs to is on the side of the heavenly treasure instant, and the ancestor of that temple even personally fought for this item. Its appearance and effects are almost exactly the same as what official Chu said about the source. It emits a faint golden glow, but it is stored in an extremely precious secret box made of sun essence gold. After hearing Sikong Tan's words, Chu Xiao was 90% sure that it was the source. However, it would be troublesome if this thing fell into the hands of the Sanskrit sect. Given the current scale of the Sanskrit sect, even if Chu Xiao used all his trump cards, he still wouldn't be able to defeat them. This source is now in the hands of the Sanskrit sect. Do you know if the Sanskrit sect has researched anything about it? Sikong Tan shook his head and said, I really don't know about this. My disciple only heard a few words. This source was first obtained by the Tianluo treasure temple, but in the end, it was taken away by the Sanskrit sect. Moreover, at that time, one of the higher-ups of the Tianluo treasure temple sacrificed his life to seal a part of the power of that thing. They were thinking that even if they couldn't get it, they couldn't let the Sanskrit sect use it. Later, that thing should have been kept in the Vishnu temple of the Sanskrit sect. Although the strength of the Vishnu temple has always been inferior to the Shiva temple and the Brahma temple, they are good at all kinds of strange secret techniques. They have also researched all kinds of strange things. Therefore, the thing that is suspected to be the source has always been kept by the Vishnu temple. After hearing this, Chu Xiao rubbed his chin and narrowed his eyes. It could be said that Mei Qinglian understood Chu Xiao very well. When she saw his appearance, she could roughly guess what he was thinking. He must be plotting against someone else. Hey, I say, you can't be thinking about the Sanskrit sect, right? That is the Sanskrit sect that has the strongest people in the ninth heavens. The martial immortals of the Sanskrit sect added together are probably more than the entire eastern region. Chu Xiao narrowed his eyes and said, I killed Xian Jialua. Mei Qinglian had a look of speechlessness and said, I know you killed Xian Jialua. But the problem is, the Sanskrit sect has more than one Xian Jialua. Right now, in the lower realm. In short, for now, it is better for us to keep a low profile. In fact, Mei Qinglian's character was not so conservative and stubborn. On the contrary, she was also a very radical and bold person. But compared to Chu Xiao, Mei Qinglian's so-called radical boldness was nothing. Chu Xiao was someone who dared to poke a hole in the sky. In normal times, if the Sanskrit sect repeatedly targeted them, Mei Qinglian would definitely agree to fight back. But in this kind of situation, the upper and lower realms might connect at any time, so it was better to be more obedient. Chu Xiao shook his head and said, I know that the Sanskrit sect has more than one Xian Jialua. But at the same time, the Sanskrit sect has more than one enemy. Xian Jialua was the new lord of the Vishnu palace of the Sanskrit sect. He had a promising future. When I killed him, it was equivalent to slapping the Sanskrit sect in the face. But after that, did anyone from the Sanskrit sect come to find trouble with me? No, there was only Yindala. But Yindala coming to find trouble with me was not an order from the higher-ups of the Sanskrit sect. Yindala came on his own for the world-ending fire. At this point, Chu Xiao revealed an unreadable smile. Obviously, in the eyes of the Sanskrit sect, I, Chu Xiao, am just an insignificant person. I killed Xian Jialua and slapped the Sanskrit sect in the face. They will be angry, but they will not put me on the table. Because now, there are more troublesome opponents waiting for them. For example, the treasure Buddha of heaven. As he said, Chu Xiao turned his gaze to Sikong Tan. What's the situation in the entire western region now? Is it very sensitive? Sikong Tan was stunned for a moment, then immediately said respectfully, Official Chu's eyes are like torches, and your foresight is like a god. During this period of time, the Sanskrit sect and the treasure Buddha of heaven did not have a fierce battle, but the three main palaces of the Sanskrit sect have begun to withdraw their forces at the same time. At the same time, the treasure Buddha of heaven also called back all the monks who were out on a parade. The atmosphere in the entire western region is like a storm, and no one knows when it will come. Chapter 1327. Xianxia's death at the hands of Chu Xiu was seen as a slap in the face to the Brahmin sect. Although martial immortals were precious and powerful, even in the Three Pristines Temple, which stood at the peak of the Daoist world, martial immortals were absolute powerhouses. A warrior at the first heaven could not affect the survival of the Sanskrit sect. Therefore, to them, this was not a big deal. But in reality, Xianxia's death had broken the balance in the western region. The Sanskrit church possessed an incomparably deep foundation. According to Fang Yinglong, if Xianxia did not die and successfully entered the great heavenly divine palace, he would be able to directly reach the third level of martial immortal realm. Furthermore, the Sanskrit sect had a secret technique passed down by generations of martial immortals. It was a secret technique passed down by generations of martial immortals. It was not an infusion of power, but the power of laws. With the inheritance of the three gods, Xianxia could reach the sixth heavenly layer of martial immortal in an extremely short period of time. Thus, Xianxia's death was not as simple as the death of a level 1 martial immortal. Instead, it was the death of a level 6 martial immortal. It broke the balance between the Sanskrit school and the heavenly treasured Rakshasa. As for what the western regions would be like after the balance was broken, there was no need to say much. Just like what Sikong Tan had said in his intelligence, a storm was brewing, and no one knew when it would erupt. Listening to Chu Xiu and Mei Qinglian's conversation, Sikong Tan broke out in a cold sweat. What are they talking about? Plotting against the Sanskrit sect, the leader of the Buddhist sects in the western region? In the eyes of others, this was no different from courting death. Chu Xiu glanced at the nervous Sikong Tan and said indifferently, "Don't worry, even if I make a move against the Sanskrit sect, I won't let you be the vanguard. First, give me a copy of the information your disciple has collected about the Sanskrit sect." After sending Sikong Tan away, Mei Qinglian whispered from behind, "In fact, you don't have to be so anxious. There is still some time before the Daoist and the lower world unite. With our speed of development, by the time the upper and lower worlds reconnect, we can even develop a strength not inferior to High Heaven sect." Chu Xiu sighed softly and said, "Time? It was precisely because time was running out that I was in such a hurry. I need to make a trip to the western regions. If the plan goes smoothly, the forces under my command will be unified and ready to take action. I'll leave this matter to you. I'll go to the western region alone." Hearing what Chu Xiu said, Mei Qinglian did not continue to persuade him. She knew that once Chu Xiu had made a decision, it would not be easy to change it. However, there was one thing that she did not know. Chu Xiu was not afraid of the connection between the upper and lower realms, but Dugu Weiwei, who was hidden in the netherworld heaven. Even if the upper and lower realms were connected, with Chu Xiu's current strength, he had nothing to fear. It was enough for him to occupy a place in this chaotic world. But the Dugu Weiwei, hiding in the netherworld heaven, had been giving Chu Xiu pressure, especially after he felt the origin. When Tianhun told Chu Xiu about the origin, Chu Xiu only regarded the origin as the key to open the everlasting heaven. As a result, when he also obtained the origin, felt its power, and even benefited from it, Chu Xiu understood that the origin was not as simple as a key. Chu Xiu himself had obtained the origin of yin and yang, and he had not even used it yet. He had increased one level of martial immortal only by relying on a trace of power that overflowed when the origin of yin and yang collided. If he could really activate the power of the origin, how terrifying would it be? Dugu Weiwei had at least 2 origins in his hands, and it was even possible that he had 3. It had been 500 years since he had obtained these origins. Only God knew to what extent he had studied the power of the origin. Therefore, Chu Xiu could only use all means to catch up with him. There was a road from the southern region to the western region, but Chu Xiu did not take it. Instead, he went through the 100,000 mountains of the southern region to the western region. Chu Xiu was a well-known figure in the Daoist. Going to the western region at this time was a bit too obvious. Although Chu Xiu would encounter the barbarians in the southern barbaric land, the Black Luo tribe was already considered a large tribe in the entire southern barbaric land. With the token of the Black Luo tribe, Chu Xiu wouldn't cause too much of a commotion when he crossed the southern barbaric land. It was just that the road in the southern region was a bit difficult to travel. With Chu Xiu's current speed, it still took him more than a month to get out of the southern region and come to the western region. But after arriving in the western region, Chu Xiu found that he was a bit conspicuous. No wonder the disciple of Secong Tan had to choose to join a small temple in the Zen sect to hide his identity and inquire for information. It was really hard to find a few rogue cultivators of other sects in the entire western region. When Chu Xiu walked in the entire land of the western region, the warriors who came and went were either monks or lay disciples who had not shaved their heads. Basically, there were very few rogue cultivators, so other warriors who came to the western region were unusually conspicuous. Fortunately, Chu Xiu had also cultivated a Buddhist cultivation technique. The aura around him changed, and in an instant, he had already become a Buddhist disciple who had not shaved his head, emitting a Buddhist glow. It did not seem out of place at all. The Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple and the Buddhist sect shared the western region equally, so the entire Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple was actually not a whole. Except for the headquarters temple, the other pavilions were scattered throughout the western region. The first person Chu Xiu wanted to find was his old friend, Fa Ming of the Huayan Pavilion. The Huayan Pavilion was stationed in the Pushun Commandery of the western region. The most central area was where the Huayan Pavilion was located. When Chu Xiu saw the location of the Huayan Pavilion, he was slightly surprised. The 10,000 feet wide temple hall was extremely magnificent. There was an endless stream of Buddhist monks and pilgrims coming and going. It could definitely be considered a peak of incense offerings. It was not inferior to the Sabodhi Monastery and the Great Light Temple in the lower realm. It should be known that this was only a pavilion under the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple. It was not where the main body of the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple was located. In fact, the Huayan Pavilion was not the strongest in the entire Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple. Chu Xiu walked to the door and said to the monk guarding the door, "I would like to request to see Master Fa Ming." The young monk guarding the door glanced at Chu Xiu and said lightly, "Sorry, Master Fa Ming does not see guests." Chu Xiu frowned. The monks of the western region, or rather the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple, were a little too arrogant. Why did he not notice this when he was in the Daoist? Actually, these monks' attitudes were normal. The disciples in charge of guarding the door were the young elite disciples of the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple. They were young and arrogant. Moreover, in the entire western region, other than the hostile Sanskrit forces, all the itinerant cultivators in the temples were people of the Zen sect. No matter how strong they were, they still had to be polite when facing the warriors of the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple. Chu Xiu was a new face. He could not walk the streets with the aura of a martial immortal. It was normal for him to be looked down upon. Chu Xiu had a faint smile on his face as he touched his nose. He had not been treated like this in a long time. Some people feared him, and some hated him. However, the feeling of being ignored was something that Chu Xiu had not experienced in a long time. It actually gave him a very novel feeling. Of course, Chu Xiu did not have any special hobbies. With his current status, he did not need to lower himself to the level of a junior warrior. Even getting angry was not as good as it was. Therefore, Chu Xiu could not be bothered to waste any more time. A powerful force slowly emanated from his body and a Vairocana phantom image appeared behind him. Buddhist chants suddenly descended. The powerful aura immediately scared the young monk who was guarding the door so much that he almost fell to the ground. Even the first seat of Huayan Pavilion didn't have this kind of power. Which high monk has come? Please forgive us for our poor hospitality. A dignified voice was heard as Fa Ming walked out with a solemn expression. However, after seeing Chu Xiu, Fa Ming's face revealed a look of surprise. Young Master Chu. Why have you come to the western region? Chu Xiu smiled and said, Master Fa Ming, how have you been? This time, I have something to discuss with your celestial treasure temple. This matter is a bit secretive, so I'm afraid it's not appropriate to talk about it outside. Fa Ming hurriedly brought Chu Xiu to a side hall and asked, Young Master Chu, is there something urgent that you need to talk about? Although Fa Jing had warned Fa Ming in the Daoist temple that Chu Xiu was not an easy person to deal with and that he had to be wary of him, Fa Ming was still a person who could clearly distinguish between gratitude and grudges. However, Fa Ming was a person who could clearly distinguish between gratitude and grudges. He only knew that Chu Xiu had saved his life, and the debt of saving his life could not be easily repaid. Chu Xiu did not answer Fa Ming directly. Instead, he asked, is the situation between the Celestial Treasure Temple and the Sanskrit sect very sensitive recently? Fa Ming smiled bitterly. Sensitive? It can be said that it is quite sensitive, and it will explode at the slightest provocation. The chief of Huayan Pavilion is not here right now. He is in the Celestial Treasure Temple discussing secrets with the other chiefs and pavilion masters. Oh? Then why haven't they started fighting? Fa Ming paused for a moment. Thinking that this was not a secret, he said, it's nothing much. It's not that they don't want to fight, they just don't dare to. As for the recent events in the lower realm, I believe that young Master Chu, as the successor of the ancient sovereign, should already know. At this juncture, the Daoist should not have too much internal strife, so in response to this situation, the ancient sovereign personally invited the World Supreme and the Master of the Sanskrit sect to the northern region to discuss Dao. Chu Xiu raised his eyebrows slightly. The Master of the Sanskrit sect and the World Supreme of the Celestial Treasure Temple were not in the western region. This was somewhat unexpected to Chu Xiu. So you don't dare to make a move without these two around? Fa Ming shook his head. It's not that we don't dare to make a move. It's just that although the Sanskrit sect lost a hall master, they still have a fighting chance if we really fight. We will also suffer heavy losses. Without the World Supreme, we can't even send a message. Who would dare to take such a big risk and order a fight to the death with the Sanskrit sect? But if we don't make a move, the chiefs and pavilion masters will not be satisfied. The previous lord of the Vishnu Palace died early, and the new lord of the Vishnu Palace was killed by young Master Chu. This is such a good opportunity for us to not make a move. It's really not satisfying. Chu Xiu squinted his eyes and said, now, the masters don't have to be dissatisfied. Why? Because I'm here. Chapter 1328. Fa Ming was just a straightforward person, but he wasn't an idiot who couldn't understand. When he understood Chu Xiu's meaning, he was shocked. Young Master Chu wishes to join forces with the precious temple of Empyrean? Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes. Back at the exalted divine palace, when you were facing the Sanskrit, it was I who helped you solve the problem. Now that you are facing the Sanskrit, I can help you solve the problem as well. Great Master Fa Ming, do you think that I am fated to be with the Buddhist sects? Fa Ming didn't know if Chu Xiu was fated to be with the Buddhist sects, but he did know that he had no say in this matter. Young Master Chu, with my current position, I cannot interfere in this matter, Fa Ming said gravely. The one in charge of the precious temple of Empyrean is the head of the Life Transformation Pavilion, Zen Master Jishan. I will introduce him to you, young Master Chu. Then I'll have to trouble you, Great Master Fa Ming. The precious temple of Empyrean was located in the very center of the eastern part of the western region. The Life Transformation Pavilion wasn't actually located there, but Zen Master Jishan was currently in charge of the temple on behalf of the World Exalted One, so he naturally had to stay inside. Chu Xiu had thought that the Flower Stern Pavilion was already very grand, but the grandeur of the precious Temple of Empyrean far exceeded Chu Xiu's imagination. When the entire precious Temple of Empyrean came into view, Chu Xiu even thought that he had arrived at the holy land of the Buddhist sects, the Spirit Mountain. As far as the eye could see, countless golden glazed temples and palaces had been constructed. Golden light enveloped the earth, and anyone who stepped within a few li of the precious Temple of Empyrean would feel as if they were immersed in a boundless Buddhist light. The strangest thing was that the Hall of Great Strength at the very center was actually floating in midair. Countless formations must have been used to support it. This had no effect on the hall's defenses. In any case, as far as Chu Xiu was concerned, it could only be used for one thing: pretentiousness. Chu Xiu's lips curled into a sneer at the thought of this. In fact, in the entire Daoist world, no one was as overbearing as the celestial treasured Buddha. As for the other three regions, even the North region, where the Three Pristines Palace of Taoism reigned supreme, could accommodate other martial artists except for the Taoism lineage. But within the boundaries of the Western region, apart from the Heavenly Net Treasure Temple Zen sect and the Brahmin sect, there was almost no room for any other martial artists. Chu Xiu walked all the way from the Pushun Commandery to the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple. All the prefectures and prefectures that he passed through were dedicated to the monks of the temples. Ordinary people and low-level martial artists worshipped those small temples, and those small temples were dedicated to the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple. Finally, the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple was a grand occasion. Fa Ming pointed at the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple with a proud expression. "Young Master Chu, please take a look. This is where my Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple is located. 10,000 years ago, when my Buddhist sect came to the Western region, this place was still a barren wilderness. But now, it has become a Buddhist holy land that shines with Buddha's light." Chu Xiu sneered in his heart. For the sake of this Buddhist holy land, the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple had killed many people. Over the past 10,000 years, the hard work of countless people and low-level martial artists in half of the Western region had been harvested by the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple. In the holy radiance of the Buddha's light, Chu Xiu could faintly see a trace of blood swimming. Although he thought so, Chu Xiu still smiled and said respectfully, as expected of the Buddhist holy land, "The Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple is magnificent and extraordinary." Fa Ming had a proud expression and asked Chu Xiu to wait at the door. He had to go in and report first. After a while, the door of the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple opened and a magnificent voice came. "Young Master Chu, please come in." The voice was magnificent and deep, even having the effect of shaking one's heart. It was as if all lies and deceptions would have no place to hide from this magnificent voice. Of course, with Chu Xiu's state of mind cultivation, the thickness of his skin, and the ability to lie without blinking, this thing was basically useless against him. Inside the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple, rows of Buddhist disciples shone with Buddha's light as they stared at Chu Xiu. The weakest among them was at the heaven and earth mysterious realm, and there were even several martial immortals among them. Moreover, this was certainly not all the martial immortals of the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple. For example, in the Life Transformation Pavilion or Huayan Pavilion, which were ranked at the top, the heads were basically all martial immortals. There were even 2 martial immortals in the Life Transformation Pavilion. If it was anyone else being stared at by so many Buddhist experts, they would definitely be extremely flustered. However, Chu Xiu had seen many big scenes and was still extremely calm at this moment. He cupped his hands and said to the crowd, "Eastern regions Chu Xiu greets the Great Masters and Great Master Fa Jing. Long time no see." Among the several old monks at the very front, the young-looking Fa Jing was extremely eye-catching. Furthermore, when Fa Jing left the Great Celestial Divine Palace, he was only a 3rd-layer martial immortal. Yet, he was now a 5th-layer martial immortal. The Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple was also a great sect that had existed for countless years in the lower realms. They definitely had some sort of method that could raise the cultivation of a martial immortal. Fa Jing nodded and pointed to an old monk beside him. The old monk was dressed in golden monk robes but had not shaved his head. He had long gray hair and said, "This is our life transformation pavilion's head, Zen Master Jishan." The old monk with long hair and not shaved his head even looked kind and amiable. However, Chu Xiao knew that he was definitely an extremely terrifying existence. The Life Transformation Pavilion was one of the strongest temples under the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple. In terms of battle prowess, they had once defeated the Sanskrit sect's strongest sect, Shiva Palace, to the point of being unable to raise their heads. They had even specially developed the World Annihilation Flame that could block the purifying Lotus Buddhist light. Since Zen Master Jishan was the chief of the Life Transformation Pavilion, then his hands must have been stained with the lives of many Sanskrit cultivators. Zen Master Jishan looked at Chu Xiao and said in a deep voice, "Just now, Fa Ming said that you can help my Tian Luo Treasure Temple to deal with Sanskrit?" Chu Xiao nodded and said, "Yes." "Why?" "Because Sanskrit is also my enemy." Chu Xiao waved his hand fiercely and said with an angry look on his face, "Previously, Brahma sect's Vishnu Palace Lord was bewitched by Heavenly King Palace Lord and came to find trouble with me for no reason. In the end, he was killed by me. After that, the new Lord of Vishnu Palace, Shingala, targeted me again and again. In the Great Luo Divine Palace, I joined hands with Great Master Fajing to kill him. From then on, Sanskrit hated me completely. I wonder if Zen Master Jishan has heard that not long ago, the Vice Temple Master of Shiva Palace, Tuoluo, had joined hands with the Sword sect of the southern region to cause trouble for me. I can see that if the Sanskrit sect is not destroyed, I will never have a day of peace. So, I won't let go of any opportunity to deal a heavy blow to the Sanskrit sect." Zen Master Jishan did not pay any attention to Chu Xiao's incomparably furious and indignant expression. He remained calm as he asked, "In the exalted heaven, you were able to join forces with Fa Jing because you had the strength to do so. And now, you want to join hands with the entire Heavenly Luo Treasured Monastery? Why?" Chu Xiao pointed at himself and said in a deep voice, "It's also because of my strength. I, Chu Xiao, have the cultivation of a third heaven martial immortal, but I can fight against a fifth heaven martial immortal. I also have 2 first heaven martial immortal experts under my command, and a force not inferior to the entire Imperial Sky Pavilion. I wonder, is that enough?" Some of the monks present revealed strange expressions. Although they were from the western region, they were not completely ignorant of the situation in the other 3 regions. The force under Chu Xiao's command was not inferior to the Imperial Sky Pavilion, in fact, it had far surpassed the Imperial Sky Pavilion. However, they had never heard of a large-scale war in the eastern region. How did Chu Xiao accumulate such a force? Zen Master Jishan shook his head and said, "It's enough to deal with ordinary small sects, but it's not enough to deal with the Sanskrit sect." Chu Xiao shook his head and said, "No, it's enough. I've heard from Master Fa Ming that the Heavenly Luo Treasured Monastery hasn't made a move yet. It's in a stalemate with the Sanskrit sect because it's worried that it will injure itself if it continues to fight, which will affect the strength of the Heavenly Luo Treasured Monastery. However, the balance between the Heavenly Luo Treasured Monastery and the Sanskrit sect has been broken. What's missing is the last straw that breaks the camel's back." Chu Xiao pointed at himself and said, "I am that last straw. In the Sanskrit sect, Shiva Palace and Brahma Palace are the strongest, followed by Vishnu Palace. These 3 palaces guard the 3 western regions of the western region. Your temple understands the Sanskrit sect very well, and I'm sure the Sanskrit sect also understands your temple very well. Therefore, as long as the Heavenly Luo Treasured Monastery puts all its strength into the battlefield, and let the Sanskrit sect attack with all their strength, I'm willing to attack the Vishnu Palace from the rear, so that the 3 palaces of the Sanskrit sect will be reduced to 2. The monks looked at each other. Chu Xiu's method was feasible, it should be said that it was very feasible. If they could eliminate one of the palaces of the Sanskrit sect, even if it was the weakest Vishnu palace, it would be enough to make the Sanskrit sect suffer a great loss. An old monk could not help but ask, "What you said is simple, but although the Vishnu palace is the weakest, in the entire Sanskrit sect, all kinds of strange techniques, formations and other things are developed by the Vishnu palace. Once the war starts, there will certainly be people guarding the Vishnu palace. What will you do? Moreover, you brought so many people to the eastern region. I'm afraid that the Sanskrit sect will be aware of you as soon as you reach the western region. Do you think that the Sanskrit sect is blind?" Chu Xiu said indifferently, "As long as the heavenly Luo treasured monastery attacks with all its strength, how strong will the people guarding the Vishnu palace be? I can kill anyone under the sixth-fold sky. As for the location of the surprise attack, when did I say that I want to attack the Sanskrit sect openly? Since it is a surprise attack, it naturally needs to be a little more secretive. I will go around to the western region from the 10,000 great mountains and attack the Vishnu palace." But those barbarians of the southern barbarian land, without waiting for the old monk to finish his words, Chu Xiu directly said, "Master, you don't need to worry about this, that is my problem. Now, I have come to the western region from thousands of miles away, come to the heavenly Luo treasured monastery, and have already revealed the entire plan. In the end, masters, will you agree or not?" Everyone present turned their eyes to Zen Master Ji Shan. The heavenly Luo treasured monastery had strict rules. There would never be a situation where there was a disagreement or a quarrel. Before the revered one of the world left, he had given the power to control the heavenly Luo treasured monastery to Zen Master Ji Shan. Now, any decision of the heavenly Luo treasured monastery, as long as Zen Master Ji Shan nodded his head, it would count. Zen Master Ji Shan looked at Chu Xiu with an unfathomable look in his eyes. After a long time, he said, "Can I trust Benefactor Chu?" Chu Xiu said boldly, "Of course you can. I, Chu Xiu, am a man of my words. Those who have cooperated with me have never regretted it." Zen Master Ji Shan put his palms together and said in a deep voice, "After 3 months, the heavenly Luo treasured monastery will begin to gather and attack the Sanskrit sect. I hope Benefactor Chu will not let the heavenly Luo treasured monastery down at that time." Chapter 1329. After receiving Zen Master Jishan's promise, Chu Xiu immediately took his leave and prepared to return to the eastern region. Chu Xiu did not know what was going on in Tianluo Jewel Temple's mind. But he only knew that if the current leader of Tianluo Jewel Temple was a powerful person, he would definitely agree to it. If he let go of such an opportunity to severely damage Sanskrit, when the next Lord of Vishnu Temple grows up, Sanskrit and Tianluo Jewel Temple will once again be in balance. At this time, in Tianluo Jewel Temple, the old monk who previously questioned Chu Xiu saw Chu Xiu's figure disappear completely. He could not help but ask, "Chief, can Chu Xiu's words be trusted? Other than in the Daoist, we have never come into contact with him. What if he deceives us?" Zen Master Jishan said in a deep voice, "Of course not. He is deceitful and full of lies." The old monk was surprised and asked, "Then why did you agree to it?" Zen Master Jishan looked to the west and said lightly, "Because one thing he said is true, he also wants to destroy Sanskrit. The reason is not important, what is important is the result. He will not deceive Tianluo Jewel Temple about this result." Why? Because in the entire Daoist, no one can offend both Tianluo Jewel Temple and Sanskrit at the same time. The enmity between Chu Xiu and Sanskrit was real. A palace lord and a temple lord had died in Chu Xiu's hands. For so many years, it could be said that other than Tianluo Jewel Temple, no one could make Sanskrit suffer such a great loss. But now, Chu Xiu did it, so the enmity between him and Sanskrit was irreconcilable. If he still dared to offend Tianluo Jewel Temple at this time, he could only be a madman. Zen Master Jishan could see that Chu Xiu was lying, but he could also see that Chu Xiu was not a madman, so naturally he would not do such things. Go, all halls, the bigger the better. Let the Sanskrit sect see that our heavenly Luo treasure temple is ready to eradicate these heretics. After returning to the southern barbaric land, Chu Xiu did not delay and immediately called all the martial artists who were in seclusion to the Daoist continent, leaving only a small number of people to guard the lower realm. He only had 3 months. It had taken him more than a month to return from the western regions, and it would take him another month to go there again. Because there were so many people, it would take even longer this time. Therefore, there was not much time left for Chu Xiu to gather people. When the people from the lower realm came out of seclusion one after another, Chu Xiu told them about what had happened. Wei Shuya and the others were not too surprised. Since Chu Xiu had gone to the western region and settled the matter, it proved that Chu Xiu had a certain degree of confidence in this matter. They only needed to execute it. Chen Qingdi's eyes lit up. The bald donkeys of Sanskrit? They were beaten up as soon as they came out of seclusion. Not bad, not bad. In fact, Chen Qingdi's path of martial arts was also suitable for breaking through in the midst of battle. Although he was basically the one who was one-sidedly abused in the battle with Jun Wuxian, and had even lost an arm before he could recover, but he had also gained a lot of enlightenment in his cultivation. Lu Jianghu reminded him from the side, Sanskrit is not bald donkeys, they have hair. Chen Qingdi waved his hand casually and said, who cares, anyway, they are the same as bald donkeys. Lu Jianghu reminded again, Sanskrit and Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple are not the same. Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple is a branch of Zen. They have some origins, but they are completely different. Chen Qingdi looked at Lu Jianghu with an unfriendly expression. Is this guy addicted to tearing me down? Seeing Chen Qingdi's expression, Lu Jianghu immediately shrunk his neck and quickly said, if you say it's the same, then it's the same. As long as you are happy. Lu Jianghu was still a little afraid of Chen Qingdi. It should be said that he was a little afraid of this kind of crazy battle maniac. Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, all right, don't talk nonsense. We don't have much time. Let's go to the southern barbarian land immediately. Hey Jia, Green Jade. How much do you know about the barbarians near the western region? Hey Jia and Green Jade were specially called by Chu Xiu from the depths of the southern barbarian land. Previously, he might not have attracted attention when he went through the southern barbarian forest alone, but this time he was going to cross the southern barbarian forest with tens of thousands of people. Unless the barbarians were blind, they would not turn a blind eye to it. He Jia said, I have some dealings with them. The barbarian tribes in the western barbarian forest are very big, much bigger than our current He Jia tribe. Moreover, they have a large tribe, the Luo Shan tribe, which governs dozens of tribes in the western barbarian forest. The leader of the Luo Shan tribe, the old barbarian king, is very strong. I'm afraid he is not weaker than you, divine envoy. Moreover, the old barbarian king is fair and has never bullied other tribes. He even helped those tribes when they were short of prey. Therefore, he is respected by other tribes. If you want to cross the southern barbarian forest, as long as you can deal with the old barbarian king, then everything can be solved. Chu Xiu nodded and said, you guys come with me to the western barbarian forest first. The others will follow behind. Compared to dealing with the top sects like the Daoist, Chu Xiu actually preferred dealing with the barbarians. At least there were fewer tricks. The Luo Shan tribe was located in the deepest part of the western barbarian forest. The last time Chu Xiu went to the western region, he did not pass by this place. There were many checkpoints formed by small tribes to block his way. But, with He Jia and Green Jade leading the way, the Black Luo tribe could be considered as a large tribe among the barbarians. Therefore, everyone gave way to them. After walking for several days, the Luo Shan tribe finally appeared in front of Chu Xiu. Most of the barbarian tribes were very simple and crude. Because it was convenient to migrate, the barbarians themselves did not care about it. But, the Luo Shan tribe looked like a small city. It was built using bluestone, which was rare in the southern barbarian forest. It looked very decent. In fact, many of the buildings were built in imitation of human cities. This made Chu Xiu feel very novel. He Jie, Green Jade, and Chu Xiu had just arrived at the gate when they heard a loud rumbling sound. Then, a man fell down from the gate. The barbarian was more than 20 feet tall. Even the tall and mighty He Jie looked like a dwarf in front of him. He wore a tiger-skin skirt, and his naked upper body was covered with tattoos. Even his face was covered with tattoos. He looked like a devil at first glance. The ground seemed to shake with every step of this giant barbarian. His body contained a formidable strength. It could be said that he was the strongest barbarian Chu Xiu had ever seen apart from Chenqing Di. He Jie, did you bring this human to add to our dinner tonight? Also, the little girl Green Jade is here. Have you thought it through and decided to marry me? The strongest warrior should have the prettiest girl. Marry me, Long Shan, and I promise you that you will have countless prey. I can even break the horn of the mountain flood dragon for you. Chu Xiu looked at the giant with a strange expression. Then, he looked at Green Jade, who was only slightly taller than an ordinary girl. Chu Xiu did not dare to think too much about it. Green Jade's face turned red, and she said angrily, Long Shan. I am the priest of He Luo tribe. What nonsense are you talking about? Insulting me is insulting my He Luo tribe. Do you really think that you can bully my He Luo tribe as you please? Long Shan opened his big mouth and smiled. Mother taught me that you girls all have one thing in your mouth and another in your heart. You obviously want to do it in your heart, but you have to refuse with your mouth. You will only agree after asking for it several times. Troublesome, really troublesome. But, you are the most beautiful pearl of He Luo tribe. If you think one time is not enough, I can come a few more times. He Jie's face darkened. Long Shan. This is the divine messenger of He Luo tribe. Don't be rude. I told you before that I want to see the old barbarian king. Then, He Jie whispered to Chu Xiu, divine messenger, he is the #1 warrior of Luo Shan tribe, Long Shan. He is very strong, and even I am not his match. It was said that when his mother was pregnant, she had killed a ferocious beast, the black dragon. That might have been the last black dragon in the entire 100,000 mountains. Long Shan was born bathed in the dragon's blood, so he had extraordinary strength since he was young. But, I heard that his head fell on a dragon's horn when he was born. So, his brain is not very good. I hope Lord doesn't take offense. Chu Xiu raised his eyebrows. He suddenly felt that Long Shan's mother was a ruthless person. She was about to give birth, but she was still able to kill an ancient fierce beast. Long Shan disdainfully said, isn't he just a human? What divine messenger? He hadn't finished speaking when an old voice came from the city, Long Shan, don't cause trouble. Bring them in. Hearing this voice, Long Shan obediently brought Chu Xiu and the others into the city center. They arrived at a bluestone hall. But, when Chu Xiu climbed the stairs of the hall, he felt that something was wrong. On the stone pillars of the hall, not only were there many barbarian race totems, but there were also Buddhist Sanskrit and Daoist Dao patterns. It was very unusual to see such things in the barbarian tribe. When Chu Xiu entered the hall and saw the old barbarian king that He Jie held in such high esteem, Chu Xiu was truly shocked. Although his expression didn't change, his eyes were filled with shock. The person sitting on the main seat of the hall was a tall and robust old Daoist. His hair was tied up in a bun, and he wore a moon-white Daoist robe embroidered with cloud patterns. The aura he emitted was incomparably deep. It was not the aura of the barbarian race, but the aura of a martial immortal. Moreover, not even Chu Xiu could see through his cultivation. His cultivation was most definitely higher than his own. If the old man before him was not sitting here, but in a Daoist temple in the outside world, he would definitely be the headmaster of a large Daoist sect. Who would have thought that he was the most famous old barbarian king in the barbarian race? For the first time, Chu Xiu felt that he had miscalculated. He might have to change one of the methods he had prepared to deal with the barbarian race. At the same time, Chu Xiu fiercely glared at He Jia and Green Jade. Why didn't you mention this beforehand? He Jia and Green Jade were also a bit at a loss. They didn't know what they had done wrong. The old barbarian king has always been like this. You didn't even ask him about it. At this moment, the old barbarian king spoke in standard Central Plains Chinese. Little friend, you've come from afar. Please take a seat. Chapter 1330. In the barbarian tribe, Chu Xiu was facing a barbarian who was no different from a Daoist martial artist. This made Chu Xiu feel very awkward. He did not know what to say to the words he had prepared before coming here. At this time, the old barbarian king smiled and said, "Little friend, you are very surprised, right? This is normal. Anyone who sees a Daoist martial artist will be surprised. It has been 10,000 years. Although many people in my tribe only grow muscles and not brains, there are still a few who are enlightened, right? Coincidentally, I was the one who was enlightened. When I was young, I was actually very thin and weak in the tribe. Of course, this is compared to my tribe. So, when I wanted to become a high priest, I only liked to study those messy secret techniques. But later on, the tribe caught a martial artist. I was very interested in him, and I was even more interested in the outside world. Ordinary people can't learn Central Plains Chinese, but I learned it in a year. Because I was not a barbarian warrior, I did not have that many totems on my body. Moreover, my figure was very similar to that of a human. So, I had the idea of going to the outside world to take a look. I was a very bold person. I thought so, and so I did. The outside world is very big and exciting. I have to admit that the martial arts, formation, alchemy, and other things that you humans have developed are all grand and broad, and they constantly attract me. Over the years, I have joined many sections. I heard that you are the prefectural governor of the Imperial Sky Pavilion? Then you should call me senior. When I was traveling in the eastern region, I joined the Imperial Sky Pavilion and was in charge of guarding the primitive Emperor realm. In the southern region, I joined the World Sword sect to learn swordsmanship, and I also joined the Bliss Demon Palace to learn demonic secret techniques. You don't have to be nervous. I know you destroyed the Bliss Demon Palace, but it doesn't matter because I don't like the Bliss Demon Palace. Their martial arts are too extreme. I have traveled in the western region, but I didn't join any temple because I cultivated demonic techniques. The martial arts of the Buddhist sects are too extreme, and they can't tolerate any kind of power. In the end, I went to the northern region, joined the Lingbao Temple, and cultivated the Lingbao Glow. The time I spent in the Spirit Treasure Temple was the most precious and unforgettable. In the past, I always thought that you humans were the cruelest creatures. You fought and schemed against each other within your sections. In a situation where there was no conflict of interest, you would develop malice and harm each other. But in the Lingbao Temple, I learned what it meant to be a master, and what it meant to be a family. But in the end, I still left because my family was in the dense forest of the Grand Myriad Mountains. Alright, little friend, now that you know about I's experience, it's time for you to talk about yours, right? You and I are the same kind of people. If you continue to use your identity as a divine messenger to fool me, I'm afraid you won't be able to walk out of Luo Shan tribe today. Old Barbarian King had a faint smile on his face. He wasn't as honest as an ordinary barbarian. Instead, he seemed like an experienced and astute leader of a big sect. Chu Xiu heaved a long sigh, cupped his hands and said, Chu Xiu of the Eastern Domain greets Senior. The reason why I'm here is very simple. I've joined hands with the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple to launch a surprise attack on the Sanskrit sect. So, I've chosen to take a detour through the Grand Myriad Mountains in order not to be noticed by the Sanskrit sect. I've come to Luo Shan tribe this time to borrow the road. If the old barbarian king had acted like a standard barbarian, then Chu Xiu would have had countless ways to fool him. But, the man before him had mingled with the Daoist people for countless years. He had traveled to 4 regions and stayed in the Imperial Sky Pavilion, the World Sword Sect, the Blissful Devil Palace, and the Spirit Treasure Temple for such a long time. Moreover, the strength of the other party was certainly extremely terrifying. Chu Xiu couldn't see through the realm of the other party. So, he was at least at the 7th heaven layer. Moreover, the other party had a strong barbarian body. So, his fighting strength was comparable to an 8th heaven layer martial immortal at the very least. He would be courting death if he tried to play some petty tricks in front of such overwhelming strength. So, he might as well reveal everything. Old Barbarian King was also startled after he heard Chu Xiu's words. Of course, he knew what the Sanskrit sect and the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple represented. The young man before him dared to intervene in the battle between the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple and the Sanskrit sect. Moreover, he even wanted to take action himself. Such a bold action was beyond the old barbarian king's imagination. After pondering for a moment, the old barbarian king knocked on the dragon bone chair he was sitting on and said in a deep voice, "It's just borrowing the road. It's not a big deal for I. But, it's very important for you. According to the rules of the human race, you have to pay as much as you gain. I can agree to let you borrow the road. But, what can you pay?" Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, "What does Senior want? As long as it's within my power, I won't refuse." The old barbarian king stretched out 2 fingers and said in a deep voice, "These 2 things are very simple. I can't make the decision in the 100,000 mountains. You have too many subordinates. If you want to go to the western region through the 100,000 mountains, you'll have to detour around several tribes. Even if I give the order, you'll have to show your strength to the chiefs of the other tribes. You know the rules of my race. The one with the biggest fist has the loudest voice. You have to fight with the warriors of my race in public. And, you can proceed to the next step if you win. As for the second thing, I want a lot of things. Weapons, armors, array materials, and healing medicines. I want all the resources that a warrior needs. Of course, I don't want them for free. I can take out the specialties of the 100,000 mountains and trade them with you at the normal price." Chu Xiu gawked for a moment as he heard this. Then, he immediately nodded and said, "No problem." The old barbarian king was also dumbfounded when he heard Chu Xiu's quick reply. That was because Chu Xiu's reply was too simple. The big sects of the outside world had also traded with the barbarian race for many years. However, they were afraid of the rise of the barbarian race. Therefore, they had always controlled the number of barbarians. In fact, they had even bullied the barbarians for being simple-minded. After all, both sides belonged to different camps. The old barbarian king had thought that Chu Xiu would limit the number of barbarians. He hadn't expected that Chu Xiu would agree so quickly. In fact, he himself couldn't believe it. "Little friend, are you trying to deceive me? Are you planning to renege on your debt after I'm done?" The old barbarian king looked at Chu Xiu with an unkind expression on his face. Chu Xiu forced a smile and said, "I, Chu Xiu, don't have a very good reputation in the Daoist kingdom. But, I'm also famous for keeping my word. So, how can I do such a thing? Moreover, this isn't a big deal. All of the weapons and armors of the Black Civ tribe have been distributed by me. Even the materials of the armors used by the tribes around the Black Civ tribe have been distributed by me. Now that I've gained another trading partner, why would I go back on my word? The old barbarian king asked in reply, "Aren't you afraid that my tribe will become a threat to your sects after it grows stronger?" Chu Xiu finally understood the mentality of the opposite party after he heard the question of the old barbarian king. He wasn't a Daoist. And, he wasn't the one who had massacred the barbarian race. So, he obviously didn't care about that. Of course, Chu Xiu wouldn't say that. He only said in a deep voice, "The barbarian race and the human race, in my opinion, we are one family. So, what's the threat? Senior, you are a barbarian. But, what's the difference between you and the martial immortal experts of my human race? Although you and I are from two different worlds, we share the same origin. There are countless fights and killings between the sects. So, why would I care about the fights and killings between the two races? I don't know about other people. But, I, Chu Xiu, only have two kinds of people in my eyes, friends and enemies. The Sanskrit sect has tried to kill me time and time again. So, they are my enemies. The Black Luo tribe works for me. Senior, your Luo Shan tribe has lent me a path. So, they are my friends. And, since we are friends, why would I worry about being threatened? The old barbarian king had always been calm and collected when he heard Chu Xiu's words. But, he felt a bit excited in his heart. He was a member of the barbarian race. He had joined the human race's sects in the beginning. But, he hadn't harbored any good intentions. He had joined the human race as a spy. He had wanted to learn the cultivation techniques of the human race, as well as how to refine weapons and concoct pills. Then, he would launch a counterattack against the human race. However, during his time in the Spirit Treasure Temple, he had been influenced by his master, senior brothers, and junior brothers in the Spirit Treasure Temple. Those fellow disciples, who seemed unruly but were closer to him than family, had completely dissolved the hatred and prejudice between the two clans in his heart. However, he had come to know that he was the only person who didn't have any prejudices against the human race after he had returned to the Luo Shan tribe. The barbarian race was still hostile to the human race. They wanted to recapture their land and homeland. However, the human race regarded the barbarian race as wild beasts. So, they were always on guard against the rise of the barbarian race. Chu Xiu was the first person he had ever met who didn't have any prejudices against the barbarian race. The old barbarian king didn't know the true meaning of Chu Xiu's words. However, he could feel that Chu Xiu didn't have any enmity or vigilance against the barbarian race. The old barbarian king sighed and said, "It's very rare to find a person like you among the Daoist tribes." Chu Xiu didn't know why, but he suddenly felt that the old barbarian king's attitude towards him seemed to have become a lot friendlier. Chu Xiu replied in a sinking voice, "No one's thoughts are exactly the same. In fact, I'm also very puzzled. Senior doesn't have much enmity against the human race." The old barbarian king gently shook his head and said, "My race has failed to live up to expectations. So, it's useless to have enmity against the human race. My race has always resented the human race for snatching our land and slaughtering our people. However, I also figured it out during my time in the Spiritual Treasure Temple. The emergence of the human race has actually made our race take a step forward. Perhaps you can't imagine what our race was like 10,000 years ago. Our race was ignorant at that time. We had to fight against the ferocious beasts of the world. There were only two things in our life, reproduction and slaughter. We killed the ferocious beasts, and the tribes killed each other. We even killed for fun to select the strongest. We even sacrificed living people during the day of sacrifice. It was bloody and cruel. It's no wonder that the human race regarded us as wild beasts at that time. Now, 10,000 years have passed. Our race has actually made a lot of progress. At least, we don't casually kill for fun. What we pursue is power, not bloody slaughter. Similarly, we also know that the tribes belong to the same clan and should help each other. Therefore, the emergence of the human race seems to me like the cycle of the heavens. It's a calamity. It's the punishment of our ignorance. You're tuning into the Unparalleled SwordWill YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.